Welcome to Through a Scottish Prism. I hope you're all well. Now, we're just using some new technology today, folks, and I hope everything goes smoothly, so bear with us if we have a few glitches along the way. I'm joined with three of my good pals here. You can all see on the screen there. I've got at the top right, the lovely Denise Findlay, our good buddy and fellow blogger, Ian Lawson, the Paisley poet, and Jason Michael, the good old Jagged. And we're here to discuss what's been going on, what's going to happen in the future, and we'll get some guests coming in as the day goes on, and we'll be joined by them as the day goes on. So we have, I suppose, we could gloat today from the fact that everything we wrote, guys, turned out to be true, except, it's not good for the independence movement's been the loser. Jason, your thoughts on what you think the last 24 hours have shown us?
Oh, my thoughts are exactly your thoughts there, Roddy. If anything, this election has showed us that Scotland really is the loser in this election. We have seen a campaign from the Scottish National Party that is sadly disgraceful, but yet from the mood we've seen from a lot of the commentariat, from a lot of the Twitter and Facebook activity, I think we expected it. I think some of the things that were being said were just pretty disgusting and beyond the pale. The gloating this morning has left a little bit of a dampener, but there's lots of positives we can take from this. We've demonstrated that a supermajority would have achieved what we needed to achieve. Nicola Sturgeon's leadership has brought the SNP to a place where it, has lost or possibly lost its majority. It's left things on a knife edge, and of course has knocked independence way out of the park. So for the foreseeable future, I think that's the feeling we have here.
Denise, what are you thinking today?
I agree with Jason that I agree with Jason on the behaviour of the SNP leadership, not really the voters, because the voters were lied to. And it's very sad to me that the SNP would lie to the voters. And we've seen that with Labour, and SNP have done the same, because they said they needed both votes, which is not true. And they also said that the vote on the list was a vote for Nicola Sturgeon, which is also not true. So I don't appreciate parties that lie to voters. But on the point of view of the independence, it seems to me that independence is now a long way away, 5 years. There's not going to be an independence referendum this term. Already they are backing away from it. And I cannot imagine in any circumstance that Nicola Sturgeon will call one. And so that's a couple of bad things. They lie, and they're not going to give us an independence referendum. And I think the third bad thing really is that she has her successor in place with Angus Robertson. So now there's a continuation of, like what Labour did when they promised socialism but never delivered it. Now people are voting SNP the way they used to vote Labour, and they're not really thinking, why haven't they delivered independence? So we need to wake them up to that. We need to wake people up and say, you're voting for the SNP, but not only do they lie to you, they're not delivering on their promises. So I think that's really important. From our point of view, the great thing, I've been speaking to people this morning, and everybody is so supportive of Alex Salmond, and he's got masses of support in the party. And now we've got 6,000 or whatever members, 6,000 members, and they are all committed activists. So, and just my final point is a quote that I think is really important. The greatest glory in life is not never falling, is rising every time you fall. That's Nelson Mandela. So for our independence struggle, that's what we need to do.
Wonderful. Ian, what are you thinking about it all, Ian?
Well, if I ever want to spend £3 million of taxpayers' money, I would spend it exactly as Nicola Sturgeon did. She got every penny worth back through the media during this campaign. The BBC have been utterly disgraceful. I learned a lot during this campaign. I've got even greater appreciation for the good folk of Estonia, because I've witnessed what they had to go through when they were part of the Soviet Union, and all the powers of the state were being used oppressively against them. It's the most disgusting election I've ever been in. The one big consolation, and it is a huge consolation, is I'm going to sit this afternoon and watch as the SNP great victory of yesterday is diluted into a minority government, and realising that they're in the pocket of the Greens for the next 5 years, because they are going to have to rely on Patrick Harvey for anything they want to get through. He's going to have his workplace parking. Denise's women, who she's been bravely fighting for, are going to be sold down the river. And while that will not upset Nicola, it will upset a great many members of the Scottish National Party who have been warned, should have known better, and chose to ignore it. Correct.
It's what I find that the most difficult is that so many in the Scottish National Party, and let's be honest here, there's, as Denise says, there's 5,000 or 6,000 members of the Alapa Party. 95% of them are ex-SNP. And these are colleagues that you marched with, that you campaigned with, that you raised funds with, that you selected candidates with, that you won elections with. And now you treat them as an enemy. I know from very good sources that Alapa people at the counts yesterday were treated like pariah by SNP ex-colleagues. They viewed this with such joy that they've defeated a pro-independence party, but they've enabled the unionists to sit there laughing at them, laughing at independence. And today, Boris has put out a note saying there's going to be no independence referendum. Swing your hook, Nicola. You're not getting it. And she'll be able to go, oh, bad England, bad Boris. And 5 years from now, folks, the SNP will be back looking for another mandate. And they'll tell you to vote SNP 1 2. That's where we're at. And why you're gloating, I do not know. Because everything this group here and others told you would happen. We told you SNP 1 2 would only allow unionists to win a landslide. And you poo-pooed us and you attacked us when we told you the truth. That's what's going to happen. Watch, as Ian has pointed out, as the lead you've got just now shrinks and shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. You've not won, you've lost. And the independence movement is lost. And we warned you, we told you. But you attacked us for telling you the truth. While Nicola knew when she was telling you to vote SNP 1 2, vote for me as First Minister, she knew that she was enabling unionists. And she knew that there was enough people out there who would believe her and trust her. And they did it. And she's laughing. But the women of Scotland aren't laughing. And the independence movement is not laughing. What do we do next, Jason?
What do we do next? We carry on. Nothing changes. This is a setback, but this, as someone gloated at me yesterday, and I could only but smile and agree with them, that's politics, loser. Yeah, we've lost. Scotland's lost, and that's politics, and we carry on. I think if we were prepared to give up at this stage, then we shouldn't have been in the game at all. Really, that's just the nature of politics. It's this morning, this afternoon, yeah, it's heartbreaking. I was preparing something for my own podcast last night and had to stop when I realised what I was writing out for my script was essentially sour grapes. There is a bit of sour grapes about this, but what we're talking about is real. This really happened. Nicola Sturgeon and the leadership of the Scottish National Party set this line out before the electorate. It had funded, as Ian pointed out, the anti-Scottish British unionist media to sing the SNP's tune to make sure the challenge was lifted off of the SNP, while the SNP effectively misled people about the D'Hondt system, that a vote 1 and 2 for the SNP would return Nicola Sturgeon as First Minister. Well, they're not going to get, that's 1 million votes flushed down the toilet. That 1 million votes is gone, the same as 2016. That is an utter waste of time, people going out. That has made no change. In fact, the SNP might now return with fewer list MSPs, but what was always guaranteed from the very first moment was that Nicola Sturgeon will be returned as First Minister. So that was a lie. And that was rubbed in our faces when immediately after the closing of the polls, the BBC went live telling us exactly how the DeHunt system worked. And it couldn't tell us that 24 hours previously. It couldn't tell us that at the beginning of the campaign. Couldn't tell us that 48 hours previously.
Indeed.
We were being laughed at. And we were being called tinfoil hat-wearing bampots, rockets, crazy men, crazy women. We were being called everything under the sun. My mother was getting called a lot of names. Goodness knows what my mother has to do with it. Because we were explaining the DeHunt system. We were saying, you know, exactly what the BBC told us and laughed in our faces, saying once it was done. So I'm now looking at the SNP saying, well, you have sown the wind. It's time for you guys now to reap the whirlwind, because the one thing I can see now, as I tweeted in the early hours of this morning, was that politics in Scotland is now about to get a lot darker. It's dark, and I'm not for walking away, and I'm not, you know, I like to always say that I'm happy to let sleeping dogs lie, but I'm not going to let lying dogs sleep. No, I'm going to spend the next 5 years making Nicola Sturgeon's life very uncomfortable, letting her know that she lied, and every day that she puts another fudge on independence, I'm going to remind her about the Daily Record and her promise to work along with British Unionist Loyalist Labour. And I'm going to say thanks very much for nothing, Miss Sturgeon.
Okay. Well done. I've got that very video you've spoken about. We're trying out our technology here, folks. I think we can now play this. This is the very one that came out after the polls had closed from the British Broadcasting Corporation. Can you play that one for us, Donald? Pause. Or you, if you can tell me when that's ready to go, Donald. On you go, Denise.
Yeah. So on the point of the BBC, the problem is it completely excludes new parties, because if they're going on your past performance, then, and they don't let you in the debate, and of course we all know that they did a completely different rule in Wales, but where I found the message, the problem is the message couldn't get out. Because we're in a pandemic, we can't do street stalls or canvassing. We didn't have much time, and the message couldn't get out to the vast majority of people. And we needed the Alex Salmond in the debates to get the message out. So the BBC and ITV and Channel 4, all the broadcasters, excluding him from the debates, is completely anti-democratic. And it means that new parties with a new point of view, a different point of view on independence, on women's rights, on Europe, were not represented, and the voters didn't get a chance to hear the arguments to make their choice. And that is against democracy. And those TV companies and the media have completely failed in any kind of public duty responsibility. The mainstream media spent their time smearing him and anybody else who could smear, but that's what's expected of the mainstream media, and that's why they're dying. But the broadcasters should be really ashamed of themselves, and I think there should be a proper complaint, and maybe whatever you can do legally with Ofcom to make sure this doesn't happen again to anybody, because it's anti-democratic.
Well, I mean, one of my favourite moments yesterday, and I think it just highlighted what's been going on, was just as the SNP supporters around the country were getting the balloons out to celebrate winning East Lothian and winning Ayr, the BBC were calmly reminding them that they'd just lost 2 seats in the list in south of Scotland. So there was a nil gain for the pro-independence forces. So these victories in East Lothian and Ayr were for naught. They never advanced the cause of independence one single step, because the consequence of those victories was losing at least 2 seats in the list in the south of Scotland. So, I mean, you know, great victory, no progress, let's all get the balloons out. Oh, wait a minute, we're exactly where we were at the beginning.
Yeah, but not as
Why
far
did
as-
that happen? Did nobody tell us that? You know?
Yeah, but the thing about that is, sadly, it's Joan McAlpine who's going to suffer because of
Absolutely.
that. So
And
that
Paul,
is
and
making,
Paul Wheelhouse.
yeah, but Joan McAlpine in particular, and Katrina MacDonald, who also didn't win Edinburgh Southern, the
Yeah.
reaction of elements within the SNP to their own candidates losing, they were joyous, and it's appalling.
Well,
You
I mean,
know?
that the consequences of that are down the road. And that's why I'm not in the slightest, upset at the moment, because time is on our side. Everything we warned about will happen. Jason's right. In due course, this will all come out. By the end of today, an enormous number of people, if they've got a brain in their head, will be wondering, why was I celebrating yesterday? We'll get all these great victories, but we've ended up with a minority government. How did that happen? Why did Nicola not warn us about this? Nicola never warned you about this because she wants to be a wee mini dictator. She wants to have a monopoly on the independence message, and she's not bothered if independence loses its majority situation, if that's the price of her being the sole voice. But, it ain't going to work. Denise is right. I mean, the worst result yesterday was Angus Robertson winning, because that's a continuation process. When it all goes south for Nicola, and it will very soon, the minute she starts pushing through GRA, this, that and the other, not getting a referendum, having to prevaricate again for another few years, she'll abandon ship and she'll pass it over to Angus. And Angus will say, it's all going to be terribly different. I've got a plan. Give me a mandate at the next election, 2020. By the way, vote SNP 1 and 2. It makes sense. It doesn't make sense. Today, this day, will prove it yet again. And we'll be waiting. Thanks very much.
Yeah, well, I got invaded there, but I couldn't say no to the invader.
Yeah, I'm the same. I've got two poodles. You can't ignore them all the time. We've got lives to live.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that in about 10 minutes or so, Alex Salmon's going to be joining us, folks, to give us a quick speak and a chat. And remember, keep the comments coming, folks. If the things you want to ask us, ask any of our guests that are coming in today, keep doing it. But this is not the end of Alapa. This is merely the beginning. This was just a dummy run, because 4 years from now, you're going to be getting asked again for another mandate.
5.
Because there is not a chance between now and then there is going to be any kind of independence referendum. It wasn't that long ago Ian Blackford was trying to tell the voters that, well, we could have it by the end of this year. Nicola Sturgeon told us that in January 20 when she cancelled the one we were going to get in 2020, that she would be ready this year right after the election to go for it. Well, that's not going to happen, apart from one. As I said, Boris has already said no. Secondly, there is the climate conference, climate change conference in the SECC, and Miss Sturgeon is not going to miss the opportunity to be in front of a camera and pretending to be a lot more important than she is. Plus the fact the British government, who she's now in hock to, will not agree to have anything disrupt a world event. So that's this year ruled out. And then the following year, you've got the council elections, and she'll say, oh, well, council elections this year, we don't want to distract from that. So, nah, not this year. And then whatever the next excuse will be. And then we're in, oh, well, next year we've got a general election in the UK. Let's concentrate on that. Give me one more mandate. You're going to get all that again. And we're going to be back here 5 years from now, and you're going to say, oh, bad bloggers. Oh, SNP 1-2 is the way to go. Or you learn from this, folks.
Yeah.
Jason.
Me? You're looking for my. I'm half afraid to speak. I was speaking a little while ago, and I saw in the comments saying, "Wow, the ego has landed." I feel a wee bit afraid to talk now. So apologies, listeners, for the ego. If you don't have a little bit of audacity, nothing's going to get said at all. But yeah, I mean, we can go around this merry-go-round again and again. But I think, at some point we can begin to see. If you don't have a little bit of audacity, nothing's going to get said. What's happening there? Well, at some point we can begin to infer the motive by the outcomes, and the outcome here points to a motive that's a little darker and shadier. than what anyone's really willing to say out loud. So, I mean, I'm going to point to it. You know, eventually, if the outcome of the SNP's governance and leadership of the independence movement is effectively the same as the Tory parties, then, yeah, let's call a spade a spade. Voting the SNP is just, you know, had we all voted Tory for the past 6 years, we would be as close to independence now, you know, but no further ahead. In fact, if anything, we're getting further back from independence, you know, because, you know, we've an SNP government that has voted in a referendums bill, that has put various roadblocks in the places, has handed it as a gift to the Westminster government to grant permission to Scotland to commit the crime of a democracy. You know, sorry, a very long time ago, I lost faith in this. And I think we had gotten to maybe the fifth or sixth excuse from Bute House. And I thought, this is it. It's the never-ending stream of excuses. And someone pointed out to me in social media, you know, earlier this morning that, you know, the pandemic is only the latest excuse, which I agree. And it's a beautiful excuse because it's open-ended. You know, we could, you know, now that COVID-19 is just a new human reality, you know, it could be recovering from the pandemic 2059. You know, we've now got a government that's going to use every excuse it can. And I think ultimately we have to see whether or not, you know, these people may actually want independence. That's not the argument I'm making, is, you know, the outcome is no independence. So the outcomes are the same as, you know, being with the Tories or with Labour or the Lib Dems. So, you know, this is my hot take on the SNP, is, you know, as useful as an ashtray on a motorbike.
Yeah, I think, like with the Nicola in particular, this whole Section 30, it's just nonsense. She gives the unionists their best lines. Who dreamt this up, that this was the gold standard? Because it's Section 30 of the Scotland Act. So not a single other country in the entire world has ever become independent using a Section 30 of it. So how can that be the international gold standard? It's just nonsense. It's the same.
Jen, wait, can I just interrupt you, Denise? We are joined by the man himself. Alec, welcome to Through a Scottish Prism again. This is getting to be a habit. Nice to see you.
Hi, I've been listening for the last few minutes. I'm lucky you don't have a bottle of whiskey and a revolver about. You'd all be shooting yourselves. I would look. Anyway, I was going to say to Jason that the ego can't have landed because surely I'm the ego. Don't you read the press?
Absolutely.
Anyway, guys, do you want to? You want to fire in questions, and I'm anyway. Fire in questions, and I'll tell you where I think we are.
How are you feeling today about things?
Well, I'm grand. I mean, I'm you know, I've won so many elections. I get used to losing a few, you know. So it's I'm on a bad run. I've lost 2 after having won 10. So, but I look. Obviously, candidates, particularly the inexperienced ones, will be really disappointed because they, as everybody does, gets candidatitis. They were hoping for much more. And of course, we could have had much more if things had gone a bit better for us. And, you know, I think we can have a post-mortem at any point. But, I mean, there was a good result available for us, and we didn't quite get there. But it should be said, I mean, you know, forming a party or publicising a party in 6 weeks, getting 32 candidates, a manifesto, lots of things to say, important statements made, and, you know, 5,000 members, 2 MPs, 20 councillors. I think probably 50,000 votes, incidentally, which sounds a lot better than 2%. I suppose looking back, that'll be seen as no mean feat and probably something that hasn't been done before. And I comfort myself in that the resolve of the Alapa candidates and the activists seems to be pretty strong. And I don't agree with Jason at all about being no further forward. I think the position is ripe for Alapa to grow and flower and bloom in coming years. I mean, it's now a viable political party. It's a political party that's been necessary, one sitting on the independence flank of the SNP. Actually, Alapa has been a great help to the SNP in this campaign. I know that some some of you who dislike the SNP enormously. I just dislike some of the personalities in the SNP. I like the SNP, but I'm afraid I have to confess to a personal dislike of some members of it. But the SNP actually helped in this campaign two ways, Alapa. I mean, firstly, there's fairly obvious points. If you look at Ayr or Banff-and-Buck and Coastal, it's quite clear that they would have lost these seats, or in the case of Banff-and-Buck and Coastal, and wouldn't have won it in the case of Ayr without the Alapa intervention. Because I think in Banff-and-Buck and Coastal is about 1,200, 1,300 votes for Alapa in the list of the Coastal seat. And the majority SNP was 700. I think it's a reasonable assumption that the SNP wouldn't have got that 700 votes unless Alapa had been there encouraging people to vote and encouraging people to vote SNP. So I think the Alapa intervention has been helpful practically. But it's also been helpful for another reason, that most of the venom of the mainstream media has been turned on Alapa. So it's, the venom that would have been accorded to the SNP has been accorded to Alapa. And it shows the importance, I think, of having a flank party who are genuinely and forthrightly and immediately pro-independence, because it makes the SNP look that bit more moderate. Whereas the SNP, despite their prevarication, despite their hesitation, despite their delays, despite their grand old Duchess of York behaviour of going up and down this hill innumerable times, without Alapa, are seen as the radicals of the independence movement. So I think Alapa is needed because it's filling a vacuum, and I think it will grow because, yes, you're quite right. Of course, Nicola will prevaricate. Nicola lost her nerve in independence back in 2017 and has never recovered it. It's as simple as that. And Alapa, as Alapa grows, as it will, because it will be demonstrated that everything we said is correct. And, like all parties who've had electoral disappointment, you comfort yourself in every argument Alapa put forward is going to be demonstrated to be absolutely correct. There will be 1 million wasted SNP votes on the regional list. And while the unionists vote cleverly and vote tactically on the constituencies like Dunbarton or Eastwood, and by doing so stop the SNP winning the constituencies, then the SNP sends their troops over the hill or over the top like some First World War general to have 1 million votes wasted, but not just wasted, of course, letting unionists by the back door. And as the SNP list votes pile up yesterday and pile up today, that will be very evident. That's exactly what is happening. So everything Alapa said about the electoral system, about what would happen, has come true, and the extent of the opportunity missed will be plain for all to see. All these arguments will stand Alapa in good stead. Crucially, apart from the activist base, apart from the fact the party is formed and demonstrated it can fight an election, Alapa has 2 members of parliament and 20 councillors. It's got electoral credibility because we have elected members, and that will make Alapa a force to be reckoned with. And Alapa is necessary because it's no longer going to be the case that the SNP's prevarication will just be greeted by fulminations from the online social media extraordinary people who are on this call, that the SNP prevarication will be greeted by defections to Alapa. That's what will happen over the next couple of years, and that will be a good thing. Alapa will be a home for the disaffected of the Yes movement who are frustrated and angry about the SNP's inability to take their mandate and do something with it. So all of which seems to me a substantial gain. It's not just the same. Alapa exists, we think, therefore we are, and I think we'll go forward on that basis.
Can I ask you about your policy of being very positive towards the SNP?
What you said, I think you've already answered that question. You've no intention of giving up.
No intention of giving up Alapa. I mean, Alapa will elect its leader in June or whenever we can have a non-virtual conference. But I'm certainly staying with Alapa. Yes, absolutely.
Can I ask?
Brilliant.
Yeah, all right, sorry, I came
Denise.
at the wrong time. you had a policy which has helped the SNP and actually has helped independents, having possibly actually they'll get compensated on the list, so maybe it hasn't, we don't know. But are you feeling that you should be more in opposition to the SNP moving forward, or are you going to continue to be a compliment to them when they are so mean to you or to Alapa, and really not a compliment to Alapa?
I love the word mean. Mean. That Denise, you're sounding like my wee sister. That's what she'd have said. I mean, my wee sister, I should say, is an Alapa agent in the south of Scotland. But I like the SNP meanness. I mean, I have to say, many of the SNP leadership are among the most graceless people I've ever come across. I mean, John Nicholson, I think he takes the biscuit for lack of grace. I mean, this is somebody, who's the ultimate poser. He has done nothing whatsoever for the independence movement of any shape or form in his puff. He got elected in 2015 on the back of everybody else's hard work. He posed in Parliament for 2 years, got knocked out, then did nothing until 2019, and managed, because the SNP disgracefully prevented Tasmania Ahmed Sheikh from going back to her seat, managed to get in a seat he couldn't remember the name of. And this complete and utter poser has got he does cause some amusement. I always restrain myself. One day I'm going to unleash myself on Twitter. Now that Donald Trump has created a vacuum for me, I'm going to unleash myself and deal with the Nicholsons of this world. somebody who hasn't managed to do any work whatsoever apart from piggyback on the work of others. So meanness, yes. It's not meanness that worries me, Denise. It's meanness of spirit. And yes, I think Alapa will be much more vigorous post-election, because if you're fighting an election campaign where you're telling people to vote SNP in the constituency and Alapa on the list, then it is a bit silly to be mean, to use your word, to the people you're telling other people to vote for. But Alapa's not the SNP. Alapa is an independent supporting party, and Alapa will be free to criticise the lack of action, urgency, immediacy on independence. So of course it will. But I hope we'll manage to do that without the meanness spirit of the pygmies of politics like John Nicholson.
Ian.
Alec and myself are old enough in the tooth to have been through electoral disappointments in the past. And, the fact that we've been able to bounce back many times before suggests to me that there's no problem doing it this time, particularly when the evidence of what our message was being right will take no longer than 1 day to prove. We will know by 6 o'clock this afternoon who was telling the truth throughout this election and who was lying through their teeth. And I'm pretty confident the facts will back up what we said, that there'll be 1 million wasted votes, that Tory and Labour MSPs are elected thanks to those wasted votes. And the great victory of the SNP yesterday didn't last 24 hours, because the big winners are going to be Patrick Harvey and the Greens, who will be rubbing their hands, determining and writing down the list of demands they can make of Nicola in the next 5 years that she has no choice but to grant them.
I didn't see the question there.
Yes.
Oh, do you agree?
Well, I think I'm not sure that Nicola will find the Green demands all that unsavoury. I think she'll be quite happy with most of the Green demands, as far as I can make out. But it's true. Governments end up doing unpopular things, and to use an old Tory phrase, Patrick Harvey is not somebody you'd go into the jungle with. For those of us who remember the events of early February, it was 2009, where he shook hands on a budget deal at lunchtime and voted against it at 5 o'clock. They ended up, incidentally, a week later because the budget fell because of a tied vote because of his antics. They ended up a week later as being the only two people who voted against the budget in the entire Parliament because all the rest collapsed when they realised I was about to call an election. But Patrick is not one of life's. It's not one of the people you could stand shoulder to shoulder with, because you'd look around and find he wasn't there. So they'll find that, I mean, the Greens, if the Greens have the balance of power or the Greens are in coalition, they'll find them a nightmare, of course, because as soon as you come up against an unpopular policy, you won't see Patrick for dust, or he'll be thinking about trying to do something else. So you'll just get incessant demands. You'll get a demand a day, an insistence a fortnight, and an ultimatum every month. That'll be Patrick. Anyway, I mean, it may be that if Fergus Much wins West Aberdeenshire, and I wish him luck because Fergus is one of the good guys in this drama, and also would be a very good MSP. I think you'll find it quite difficult because of the strength of the Tory vote in the Shire. Which, I mean, the SNP have handed the Tories a rural vote, unfortunately. In Aberdeenshire, and they, that's about how the SNP are portrayed and seen. So I think Fergus will find it quite difficult. But on the other hand, the Tory MSP is a total clown. He's a complete idiot. So he may, who knows, that might get Fergus home. But this will be a tough shift for him, I think. And that on that, of course, is the SNP's majority on that seat. They will lose the list seats in the south of Scotland as we forecast, because they'll win the constituencies and lose the list.
We were told about gaming the system. Nicola wanted to talk all the time about gaming the system. What we've seen with the results thus far is that the Unionists have, well, the BBC referred to it as voting tactically. When we tried to do it, it was gaming the system. However you want to do it, the Unionists worked it very well. For example, Oliver Mundell, one of the great MSPs, Joan McAlpine, sadly, although raising her vote by 4%, has lost her seat and will not win a list seat, as you point out. But they used it, and they've used it more successfully than the SNP. That's just a fact, Alec, is it not?
It's an absolute fact. I mean, incidentally, I've got no objection to tactical voting. That's just smart voting. And Unionists are quite entitled to vote for each other if they want. I mean, it's just that. Well, her problem is not that Unionists vote for each other. Independent supporters don't, because they're ordered by their leadership not to. I have to say, it's more of a question of time, isn't it? I mean, if this had been a poll of political activists, let's just say the electorate had been composed of SNP activists, then Alapa would have stormed in. I mean, I saw it reported as 6. I think it was 5 SNP counters yesterday told me they'd voted Alapa. People there representing the SNP on the list. Secretly, of course, and without the earshot of the sergeant majors who were there trying to intimidate them. But so if this had been a poll of SNP activists, or political activists for that matter, then Alapa would have done great. But this wasn't a poll of SNP activists, it was a poll of the people. And the general public take time sometimes to assimilate messages. And of course, the ability to get that message across, although, despite the valiant efforts of the social media and expertise, I mean, would crucially depend on the television debates. I mean, that would have been the key. I mean, the key to this election was being shut out of the television debates. That's the absolute key to the election. I hoped and believed that you could counter that. And if we'd caught it a bit lucky in certain occasions, perhaps we could have. These things all have a percussion effect. You get a first poor poll. The BBC justifies their exclusion of us on the basis of that poll, despite one 3 days later, which showing us that the magical 6%. The BBC have the magical 6%. I mean, the BBC's assessment depends on whatever the Alapa vote was in any opinion poll. The BBC would assume that 1% more was necessary to justify coverage. That would be the BBC's rule of thumb. And of course, the BBC are in that position because of the context of the election that has been fought. Normally, a new party being launched, in addition to social media, in addition to doing the things that you would normally do, would generate body heat through large public meetings, enormous crowds, which Alapa could have done easily. And you demonstrate credibility, rather like the SDB alliance way back in the 1980s did. That was their familiar by-election tactic. Well, obviously that wasn't available to us, nor was other means of canvassing, etc. So that made the broadcasting very, very important to the campaign. The broadcasting, of course, also dictated the daily news coverage, which it wasn't just a question of not being in debates. It was a question of not getting your spot in the daily news coverage, and therefore not registering with the general public as a serious challenger, therefore being squeezed, therefore losing votes, therefore not getting elected. But, that's all what was. It's far better to look at what is and what's to come.
Jason, I'm sure you must have something to ask Alex.
Well, first of all, a clarification, because Alex came in saying, I couldn't disagree with you in the strongest of terms, Jason, but to clarify, I didn't mean that we weren't any further ahead with Alapa. Of course, I do. I think this is a great step in the right direction. I think this is what we need. What I meant by we are no further forward is effectively we are no closer to independence with the SNP than we were when you left the SNP. As you said, things have stalled from about 2017. So that was the only clarification I had. I've just had a lot of fun reading over the comments. I see there's an awful lot of activity here, and people are genuinely happy with what you've done and what the party's done and what we've been doing. The only question, I have is what is Alapa going to be doing now for the next 5 years? What's on your mind for strategies of coping and changing people's minds on gaining a supermajority, or are there other tactics or thoughts in the pot here?
Well, tactics, thoughts in the pot. Right. The stuff that Alapa produced at short notice and in double quick time is really important stuff. I'll take one example, Jim Walker's debt and assets paper. A fundamental change, not just in the approach to negotiating independence, but in the psychology of. And look, I'm despite what many people say, I'm fine about admitting mistakes. I do it all the time, but more than admitting mistakes, I try to do something about it, and it was a mistake. Not necessarily to advocate a currency union, but to advocate it in the way I did back in 2012, 2013. Because not incidentally because I would necessarily say a currency union wasn't the best policy economically at that time. I think it was, possibly, but much more because it allowed Osborne to say no. And my calculation was that George Osborne saying no to the Scots would be beneficial to us. In fact, I underrated the Scottish cringe. That George Osborne saying no to the Scots. Yes, of course, people got annoyed about it, but of course, secretly thought, "Oh my God, we're not going to be allowed to use the currency now. Oh dear, dear, dear." And that took a bit of explaining, which took time in the campaign. So it would have been far better to present the currency policy in a different way, one that didn't give an effective veto to your opponents. So therefore, the Jim Walker paper saying, look, we're not getting a share of the assets. You've decided that. Right, you can keep the liabilities as well. And that'll give us a clean break, a fresh start, and we'll go blinking into the sunlight as a new nation with a zero debt position, which will add enormously to our credibility in terms of the international marketplace. In fact, folk will be falling over themselves to buy our bonds at keen rates of interest. Keen rates of interest which allow us, so let's say it's 1% for a 20-year bond, allow us to invest in housing at a 3% return. I mean, come on, you don't have to be a Nobel laureate in economics to see the implications of that possibility. So, but more than the policy, which is great, is the psychology, of not going in as a subservient, asking for a crumb from the table of the magnificent, all-powerful Wizard of Oz, but basically saying, look, that's the logic. You've decided no share of assets, therefore no share of liabilities, therefore we start with a clean break, therefore we're going to be able to do this to the economy. That is credible. And so we'll develop your point, Jason, we'll develop that policy and we'll make it sing and dance so that people understand it, so people have confidence and look, say, Alapa, they're the people with the plan.
It's the singing and dancing that we've been completely without. When you use that language of, if we have no share of assets, we've no share of liabilities, it rings in my head like that phrase, no taxation without representation. And it's this language, this positive psychological language of, motivating people that we've felt the absence of for so long. And the feeling of heartbreak in the Alapa community online this morning, last night, was, it was heartrending. And I think the main driving force into this was that there was no great rhetoric or philosophy of independence. So, that language and that psychology is just, it's indispensable. We can't do without that. And all we're having from the leadership of the SNP is a grand silence, a great silence on any forward push or any sort of psychology of the nation becoming.
No, it's not. It's not a silence. It's one long apology.
Yeah, well, yeah, of course.
The SNP psychology is a long apology for being so rude, or to use the easiest term, so mean as to want national independence. And I characterize and I paraphrase, but it could be summarized as this: we're sorry we're being so inconvenient to win another election, and we're sorry to bother you with all these important things going on, like the pandemic, and we understand how important all that is. But when we've got time, could we have our wee independence thing sort of treated with reasonably, please, sir? I mean, I paraphrase, but and also I can tell you, I'll paraphrase this. I adore the people of England, as people well know, and a magnificent nation with a tremendous heritage and all sorts of things, fantastic literary heritage, and great traditions, and profound common sense among the plain people of England, and all that sort of stuff. But I tell you this, that no one in history has ever achieved anything taking on the British establishment with that sort of attitude. And anybody who has, you've never heard of, because they were never heard of again. And anybody you have heard of, Mr. Gandhi, for example, had a totally different attitude.
Sorry, just one more quick question, because it appeared to me here and we're live, and I might forget it in about 2 minutes. But we've been talking a great deal about the poison and the toxicity and the vitriol from a lot of SNP supporters online, and I don't want to go down the line of blaming SNP supporters, but surely you've experienced this too, and I'd really like to know your opinion on where do you think this is coming from? Why are people being so toxic in this discussion?
Well, I mean, I have no idea what you're talking about. I never experienced any of this. I never have any of this directed at me, not by the online community, not by the mainstream media, not by anyone. I have such an easy life. That's amazing. I think from the SNP people, and let's not say SNP people, through some SNP people,
of course,
particularly incredibly latecomers to the SNP, people who I had a story about one such clown in Aberdeenshire who told Hamish Verno, this is Hamish Verno, this is somebody with 50 years membership of the Scottish National Party, former Lord Provost of Aberdeenshire, somebody who is, one of the people who have done great things for the SNP's credibility, is generally regarded as a amazing guy by all concerned, opponents, friends, loyal colleagues, etc., but is not too proud to stick a leaflet through a door. That's the sort of character we're talking about. And Hamish Verno joined Alapa 5 weeks ago and was phoned up by this total and utter little pipsqueak with 2 minutes of membership to tell him his services weren't required in putting up SNP posters anymore because he joined Alapa. So, I have to say, turning down somebody who's putting up your field posters is a remarkably act of self-harm anyway. But I was just struck by the contrast between the total nonentity who was issuing the order and the person of stature he was giving the snub to. Hamish Verno is worth 100 of the, and I choose my calculation carefully, is worth 100 of that individual, at the least.
I would say, from what you're saying on that, you must be remarkably proud of the people that were out, the activists that were out working for Alapa. They put in a tremendous shift, and they deserve all the plaudits that should be coming their way.
Yeah, and I'm going to do that's my next broadcast this afternoon is a broadcast to the 5,000. I shall be feeding the 5,000 with praise. And
competition, competition.
I'm telling them that there are better times ahead for Alapa, and there are better times ahead because they've created a coherent and political force which will have its turn and will have its time.
Ian, have you got anything there you want to ask Alec?
Well, I think I'd just like to thank Alec for giving us all a bit of hope again. I think we went through some very dispiriting times, and win or lose, I mean, I was proud to stand with you. I'll be proud to stand with Alba in the future. It's renewed my hope that there are people capable of bringing independence to Scotland, because that's what we need to do. Nobody's going to give us independence. We need to fight for it. We need to have effort, and we need to have strategy. And I mean, the SNP are a strategy-free zone. They have no idea other than to keep themselves in power. They have no idea how to take on the British state. I think you do. And I think there's lots of people in Alba that are happy to go along with a leader that has some strategy. So, you've got my continued support. I wish you well in the future, Alec, and I thank you for all you've done.
I would just like to second that, Alec, before you go. I would say the one thing that stands us in great stead is that I became active in the party in the 70s. I'm used to bad times, good times. I can remember when we didn't have enough money in constituencies to leaflet the whole constituency, etc. So I think it might have been you at a conference, or the wonderful Winnie was talking about the SNP. The tide goes out, but when it comes back in, it goes further up the beach. And that's the way I view. Was it Winnie? Yeah, God bless her. I love that woman. That our tide's out just now, but we will come crashing back on further up the beach next time. Alec, thank you. And I know on behalf of everyone that's involved with Alpa, we thank you so much for your efforts, and please stay with us, because we'll stay with you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to you all. But can I just add my thanks to, because I was telling the press yesterday, who were totally disbelieving how much I'd enjoyed the last 6 weeks. I should have gone to say that the points of enjoyment were for discussions such as this. I've had a whale of a time talking to the online community. I've really enjoyed it, and also one of this. I mean, look, every campaign has successes and failures, incidentally, attached to it, and things you should do better and things you've done really well. one of the things we did really well was interspersing the online community with the mainstream journalists at the press conferences. Introducing some sanity into the conversation occasionally by having an online journalist. And also, I mean, it did strike me when I was watching this wild and woolly, and rather, I don't know how I'd describe him, somebody who looked like he just emerged from Fingal's cave or something. The guy who purported to represent the Courier, an advertiser, I don't. Do DC Thompsons realise what their journalists dress like these days? Who knows? But anyway, he was purporting to be from the Courier, and he asked a really, just not even importantly, just a totally daft question. It was about 2 days old, you see. And but one of you lot came on immediately after them, and I was just thinking to myself, my God, we've now reached a position where the mainstream media look like, weirdos and cranks, and the online community look intelligent, respectable, and asking searching questions. We've reached a total counterpoint in journalism where the mainstream media are insane and the online communities are sane, forward-looking, and thoughtful. So I've enjoyed this sort of thing enormously. So thank you.
And thank you.
There you go. That was exciting. Good to have the leader on board.
Denise is back. The style is here.
Yeah, for sure. We need a
I
bit
think
of
that
reason.
puts us puts a little more positivity on things. Good.
Yeah. He is a wonderful performer, and he is a wonderful leader. He's inspirational, and I can see with the comments coming up. Although we did have an interruption from one of Daddy Bear's boys who was trying to be nasty online, but who could be surprised at them? That's all they've got. Talking of that, can I just do a sort of wee story for our viewers? I remember the first press conference that Alec was referring to there that we all did. We were all there. And I've got to be honest and say I was kind of nervous. I was in awe of these media. I mean, these professionals, these top journalists, these bastions of the British Union and these papers. And I was sitting there about 2 or 3 minutes in, I thought, they are a shower of lobby-dossers and chancers. They don't have a brain. They were raging that we were in the room with them, but they were even angrier that they hadn't got a sniff of Halapa coming along. And as Alec pointed out, we were the ones asking the intelligent questions. And that's been the trouble the whole way through. The media are rotten. That is the fact. They are red rank rotten.
I think we've got to bear that. We have to remember that they're rotten, but I would disagree that they are idiots. These in many cases these are the cream of the crop. These are very well educated people. They've come through the finest schools, the best universities. These are the first line of protection, or the first line of defense of the British state. And they're also the first line of the attack against anything that challenges the British state. And, the scales have long since fallen from our eyes. That this media, and it's a deeply compromised media, I think that's the consensus of world opinion of the British media, is it's the, out with totalitarian regimes. The BBC and the lapdog unionist media across the whole of the UK is entirely at the disposal of the British state. The Integrity Initiative, the sort of media interference government department that works with the Herald and various other newspapers and outlets across Scotland and the UK, shows us how deeply problematic the British media is. And we have to be wise to that. The fact that Nicola Sturgeon, her best efforts to defend herself from the British media was to hire Murray Foote, the man who wrote and published The Vow. This was her best means of defence from unionism. Well, no, we need to remember this. We need to remember, you know, who this media is and who exactly we are up against here?
I think that there's a lot of propaganda, and I don't believe that the media is against Nicola Sturgeon. I think they're for Nicola Sturgeon because they know the union is safe in her hands. For example, the Sunday Post printed a picture of her with flowers carrying a baby like a week before her election. If she was any danger to the union, those kind of pictures would not get printed. Similar, another one outside her battle bus with another wee girl. They are not against Nicola Sturgeon at all.
No.
And it came to me very clear on the inquiry. And I've watched media manipulation like this before during the Thatcher years. She is completely protected. And you have to ask yourself, why is the British media and the British state and the British Broadcasting Corporation protecting Nicola Sturgeon? When she gave her evidence to the inquiry, she made many, many times when she couldn't recall, couldn't remember. Now, if they were against her, that's what they would have featured in their news broadcast that evening. Instead, they featured emotional scenes from that inquiry where she was upset and, made her out to be the good woman and Alex to be the bad man. That is propaganda, and that was done. And that was an order that went from somewhere to every media organisation. So nobody should think that the media is against Nicola Sturgeon. They are for Nicola Sturgeon.
That might change now, though. That might the election's over. You know, they'll start digging.
That's what you're saying.
They'll start digging the Scottish government on education, on other points. You know, if it ever comes to a crunch in an election and there's a better independence option, they'll swing in behind her again. But I never thought in my lifetime I would ever go through an election where the British state media, particularly the BBC, were backing the SNP. But there's no question they were throughout this election, clearly.
We have just come through an election in Scotland where the British state run the risk of having almost every unionist turfed out of the Scottish Parliament. That was the reality when Alippa appeared on the scene. That was the shockwave that ran through the British establishment. And the British establishment responded the way the British establishment always responds. They attack using native troops. And the shock troops of the Union Army, the Red Coat Army, was SNP, the SNP leadership and their tacticians. They were used and they were deployed against us because the only thing that saved Britain's backside in this election was SNP 1 and 2. Yeah, without SNP 1 and 2, the Union was toast in the Scottish Parliament. And Nicola Sturgeon is cheering this morning. She had strawberries for breakfast. This is her moment. And that more than anything, okay, tinfoil hat lads, this more than anything tells me that she also benefits from this. There has to be an agreement because nothing happens in media by accident.
No, but Jason, it's not a coincidence.
No,
that it's all started happening with the British media since Nicola employed the author of The Vow.
Imagine that.
A Labour man all his life, a pal of Gordon Brown's, a man that could who had the pull to bring in the three leaders of the British parties to write a lie in the front of the Daily Record. And he's the one in charge. And then suddenly, not long after he arrives, the SNP and their pipsqueaks like Wishart start attacking the pro-independence media.
Yeah.
And they start currying favour with the anti-Scottish mainstream media. I don't believe in coincidences, especially in politics.
Well, in media and politics, in Britain, as we were just covering, in the United Kingdom, media and politics are two sides of a revolving door. Parliamentarians, especially in the unionist establishment parliament or parties, move between media positions, high positioned media positions, and even in Facebook, might I add, come in and out of political parties and in and out of media positions, like you and I would change our socks. These are two sides of the same coin.
But I think the thing that we have to realise is that the SNP are now part of the British government establishment, the party and the Scottish government. They're not going to upset the apple cart, and that's why they're allowed their positions of power. They're allowed their positions of power to manage devolution. Whatever deals they've done deals, you know, and they're making sure they're no threat. Alba is a threat. That's why it had to be, you know, they had to have tactics against it, which was basically the blackout. So our message couldn't get any further than a small social media area, an activist area, and people that pay attention to politics. But most people don't pay attention to politics. So most people don't pay that much attention to politics. They take their view of somebody they trust. And the media has similarly built up Nicola Sturgeon to be this kind of, there is no character assassination of Nicola Sturgeon ever made in the British media, is there? Like every other politician they don't like, Alex Salmond, Corbyn, anybody else is a bit of a threat. Suddenly his character is under analysis. But there's no character assassination of Nicola Sturgeon in the British media. So she's held up, and therefore that's their way of maintaining their control of Scotland. So after 2014, they decided, how are we going to control Scotland? And they came up, well, we're not good. The unionists are rubbish. They're not going to vote Labour because they've lost trust in Labour, and they'd never vote Tory. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that the independence movement is not a threat to the British state. And that's what they've done with the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon and Angus Robertson. And Alba is going to be the only thing to stand against that over the next 5 years. And it's whether we can be strong enough.
There's a number of possibilities there, and they're not all mutually exclusive. Yes, as you know, as even Paul Kavanagh, writing the Wee Ginger Dog blog, said a long time ago, if the British state wasn't trying to act the maggot, if it wasn't trying to infiltrate these parties, control these parties, find skeletons in their closets to grab them by the short and curlies in order to force them to do what the British state needs them to do, they wouldn't be doing their job right. So there's definitely an element of that. But there's also a great deal of autonomy. The SNP is not just a puppet of the British state. I don't believe that for a second. I believe that they have their own set of ambitions and their own set of conditions under which they will want independence. And we see this with independence parties the world over, is that there are many, occasions where independence parties and revolutionary parties will slow the horses because they're not quite in control of the politics that will emerge from the revolution that they bring about. And I look at the SNP, I look at the politics of the SNP. Their politics and their vision for an independent Scotland is not that's ever going to benefit, working class people. This is quite a conservative party. The reigning leadership and its economic paradigm is conservative, and they are not prepared to move ahead with an independence that they cannot control afterwards. So right now they are doing everything they can to destroy the voice of opposition to them within their own movement.
Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jason. We're just about Gareth. We've managed to get for a wee while. He's going to come in just now, so and join us. Please don't go away, Denise. We need you back in a few minutes. Where is my friend Gareth? There he is. How are you, my friend?
Sort of okay. How are you?
Oh, always better when I see you, my friend. We're just having a wee chat, Gareth, about what happened, and I don't know if you saw Alec later.
And, purgatory and how soon the body rots, that kind of thing.
What's your thoughts on the outcomes yesterday?
Well, I wasn't surprised. A few months ago, when I got wind of a possible party that Alex Salmond might lead, I wrote to him personally and said, be cautious about doing this, And I was referring to his age, the fact that he had been so badly tarnished by the press. A good deal of the public would probably believe, there's no smoke without fire. And in fact, you can see from tweets, both from SNP members and from our tormentors, that they think he's a sex pest at the very least. So I cautioned him about going public again and suggested that perhaps he should be working from behind a new party. But then, and I pointed out to him the Jim Sillars experience, where he was Labour 1 minute and decided that Scotland should have a left-wing administration and government. And then that didn't work, so he eventually started his own party, and that didn't work. And then he switched to the SNP, and then he thought the people who did vote for him were 90-minute patriots. So there are good examples of why one has to be ultra careful about how you rejuvenate your appearance on the public stage. And indeed, as soon as Alex Salmond appeared, the Guardian, I'm pretty sure it was, said this is an ego-driven move from this man. The wonderful liberal left-wing Guardian that believes the same as the right-wing newspapers, that Scotland gets too much democracy. So that's a long answer to your question about what I felt yesterday. And a few days ago, I wrote to somebody who had switched from SNP to Alba and said, if it's only one MSP we get, that person will be mock stupid. And if we get none, it'll be a possible mortal blow. But then, you know Salmond's ability to give people hope and whip up encouragement to do better and to do more. So we shall see what happens. At the moment, I really can't stand anybody from the SNP gloating over this, which some of them unfortunately are. So I am pretty certain that I shall be impatient if I don't lose my temper with them when they come in and say, well, Alba was a useless effort. An absolutely infantile gesture towards independence. I really don't understand that point of view when a new party appears and says, look, we're with a bigger party, we just don't like some of the policies, but we suggest you vote for the bigger party and give your list vote to us. In fact, it got so bad this morning that I found myself, unfortunately, joining in a spat with the redoubtable, stertorous Peter Bell, who had come out with, who says the same thing wondrously 120 different ways. I mean, he does have a good skill. And I just couldn't take it anymore. And I noticed people were jumping all over him. So somebody said, you're not a guru. And immediately I knew what they meant. And I flipped up onto the screen from the cartoon Happy Feet about the penguins. The guru, the Buddha they had on the hill that spoke all the wisdom, but they thought he was somebody special because he had the plastic can tops round his neck. And I said, do you mean this kind of guru? Which I thought was Peter Bell. What I find troubling is, and Peter Bell's a very good example, you have great sympathy for the guy because he's put as much effort into independence as anyone else. You respect his effort, but not when he thinks what he has to say is the only answer to everything. When that happens, when somebody starts that, then you realize they're they're not really tolerant of independent thinkers. You're giving Peter Bell and his likes a platform, but he's rejecting yours. And we're going to have to go through this for a little while until the SNP folk calm down. So wasn't disappointed, but really sad. It just makes you angrier when you hear fools, trying to sound triumphant.
Yeah, I think the problem with Peter Bell is that Peter is a great exponent of all that's wrong, but he doesn't expound any explanation of how it could be better done.
Well, and all this, when I first met him, I met him on the Glasgow Green after a march, and I was absolutely knackered, but I recognised him from his internet site. I went straight to him, grabbed his hand, pumped it, shook his hand warmly and thanked him for his blogs. And in response, he immediately told me my blogs were flawed. I should deliver them in a different way.
Yes.
And I remember blinking and saying, look, I'm in a hurry now. I've got these other people I need to meet who I've only talked to on the internet. And from then on, I noticed that you could handle them easier if you buttered them up first. And then I noticed after quite a number of blogs, he doesn't actually praise anybody for their effort. It's a one-way stream from him. And I just find that mean-spirited. There are people out there I disagree with, but you have to give them their due. They're not being abusive. They're saying something and they believe it. And just give them the space to make the point of view. I'm only bringing up Peter because
that's
I
regret
regret actually finding myself critiquing somebody who believes in independence. So I find that disquieting. However, we are faced with a First Minister who, to all evidence, is scared of independence. I think she's utterly terrified, and she is finding any cause that diverts her that will hold on to her legacy until she feels it's time that she can step aside and hand the baton over to someone else because we are so near independence and it now needs that person to take us over the last hurdle. I was listening to Jason there. The Irish Free State in 1918, correct me if I'm wrong, Jason, won their independence on 47% of the vote. At the moment, the SNP is on 47% of the vote, and they're still saying we still do not have enough to do anything, to do absolutely anything. And this has been my criticism, which I thought was fairly benign until I got thrown out of the SNP without actually being a member, that they had stopped actually trying to convince and educate the Scottish population about the loss of their rights, the benefits of independence, the benefits of self-governance. That was my line for about 2 years, until such time as I started to hear people say, you're just bitter, because of what the SNP did to you, you're bitter. Well, if any of you guys have met me, I'm not a vindictive person, not in the least. And I'm often criticized for being too frivolous when one should be deadly serious because the moment demands that. However, you just get to the point where, as somebody said on Twitter, you just can't take it anymore. And by the way, I don't know about you chaps, but my Twitter site is a real bellwether of the mood of the public. Anything I have to say isn't necessarily my own words. I'll watch people, I read them, and I start to see the number of parallels, the cumulative effect of specific opinions, and I can see the way the public are thinking. And that's when I start to say, maybe my view that the SNP is the only vehicle towards for independence, maybe that's flawed. Maybe I should have a closer look at the various people who are running the SNP. And after a long, careful look at the schoolmistress presentation of our First Minister, I came to the conclusion that she is just scared stiff of independence. She's not capable of it. She's out of her depth. And the other thing I heard, just to add one more thing to you, the other thing I heard or read lots of people say is how close the SNP has become to the old Labour Party of Scotland. Well, you know, Nicola was in the street the other day telling this woman she was a racist and a bigot. And what popped up into my head? Well, it was Gordon Brown when his microphone was left open by the Times and he got into his chauffeur-driven car, canvassing day, and he was heard to say the woman he had just talked to was a bigot, a racist. So yeah, all the parallels are there and the public are noticing them.
But what's even worse, Gareth, and I say this without music, clue to everybody, is that the British media, I mean, they have talked about all sorts of things happening. For example, that we are, hi Phil, how are you doing? Welcome to this show. Yes, the British media have suggested that we are sponsored by the Russians. I have never heard such nonsense in my life, Gareth. Have you?
Das Vidania.
Dos Bedania. Up the revolution. So, and you heard the same nonsense, did you, Gareth?
I wish it to be known that there is no truth in the rumor that the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics funds or runs the Alba Party in any way. I can tell you now, he has not cashed our check. So it is a nonsense. And incidentally, we have no relationship with the American government either, nor its past president. Although, please take no notice that I'm going to Florida to his tourist resort for a long break holiday. On behalf of the Soviet Republic, I hand the submarine over to the American people.
Yeah. Well, and at that point, welcome, Phil. Nice you to sneak in there when we were in the middle of that. How are you, my friend?
Very, very good, and it was a joy to hear Gareth in full flow, measured, considered, and a rarity to see people with a measure of self-awareness. You know, when you're in a position and you see the crowd swimming in one direction and you think, well, why is it just me? And a reasonable person would and ought to consider and question their own position. You know, am I wrong here? That's what any decent, civilized, self-aware person would do. And I'm finding conversations with educated, professional, long-term SNP supporters and independent supporters, and they can't get past the haunt. They're just not interested in understanding how that works. The whole concept of, well, SNP have given me what I want all my life, so we're heading towards independence. I'm happy with it. I said, but don't you see the change? Are you paying attention? I joke with my friends, and it's the devil's in the detail. You know how many mandates is that? Number 7. I mean, is a mandate when we get a majority for independence? Is that what a mandate is when we get an election and there's a majority vote for the independence flag flying party?
I sometimes get an image in my head of Nicola in the confines of her sofa, you know, in an evening, and she's using mandates, stacking them like cards, you know, wait to see how far up she can actually get them before they fall down. I'll tell you something more serious. to put frivolity to the side for a minute. I feel really sorry for people like McCaskill. You know, these really good MPs and MSPs have made a tremendous sacrifice. A number of people who were SNP members switched just as Alex Salmon made his announcement off Alba, knowing full well, of course, that the SNP had dragged out his court case as long as they could, so it got as close as possible to elections. And if he was going to start a new party, he wouldn't have enough time to invigorate and generate support for it. And that's proved true. So there's the SNP morphing into the Labour Party of Scotland. A First Minister who sounds like too many unionists. Quite happy. Can you tell me the difference between I can work with the Labour Party and I would like to be Speaker of the House of Commons one day? What's the difference between these two statements? I can't tell them apart.
You're an ex-MP, Phil. Did it ever cross your mind to be the Speaker of the House for the English Parliament?
You know, what struck me was why we weren't copying Parnell. That was one of the earlier questions. And the answer was, well, most of the loopholes have been closed up. And then the next question that crossed my mind was, well, you know, what about Sinn Féin? There was one evening when I was at the choice, meet the Dalai Lama or go to meet Sinn Féin. And I thought, well, coming from Coatbridge, I better go and meet Sinn Féin. and I did. And I had the pleasure of Mr. McGuinness's company for about 20 minutes. And he spoke very, very well of Ian Paisley and how he didn't get the credit he deserved for the Good Friday Agreement. And what staggers me in all this chaos, all of that work, all of this independence that Ireland has obtained, and the peace that it has obtained, is getting thrown into the mix here, and it's now at risk. And I'm considering it's very much the same philosophy here. There's a lot of people in politics who are getting into politics, and it's maybe the best job they're ever going to get in their life. It's certainly the best pay they're ever going to get, and we can't blame people for trying to get on. I think that would be wrong. But to make it the be all and end all and to sell out your principles, for me, the independence comes before any party. I remember Alex saying that, and I was quite taken aback by it when he said it, you know, in the lead up to the 2014. But I thought, yes, it's correct. You know, it is. I mean, there's some of us down at Westminster who gave up very well paid jobs to do it, but the vast majority did very well about landing themselves a position and are very happy to continue with that. So it is disconcerting. It is disconcerting. And I met Ian Blackford, funny enough, in December when I was getting a visa for India. And we were talking about, and I wouldn't be, you know, it was a confidential, you know, he's a good guy. I like Ian. I'm not, he's doing his job well. I'm not saying necessarily his job's the right thing. Sorry.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you, Philip. Well, I did, because I wasn't sure which Ian you're talking about.
Ian Blackford, yeah. I mean, I know Ian going way back, and I think the situation is he's doing his job well, I think, but is the job the right one that we should be focusing on? Should we be playing this game with Westminster? And certainly, and there was something I spoke to Jason about earlier. I mean, what is it with all these titles? You know, you're getting these ridiculous titles, the Grand Vizier of Underwater Basket Weaving, of what? I mean, what is that all about? Are we down there to kiss ass, or are we down there to sort it out? I mean,
you can barely remember a speech that Ian has given, but you certainly remember the day he walked out of the House of Commons with SNP MPs behind him. that should have been permanent. That should have been the end of us down there.
Well,
Yeah, they
But we
the
don't have an
parallels with-
SNP who's got the cojones to do anything.
the parallels with Labour are striking. You know, this attitude of, you know, independence before any party. We can't possibly expect that from the SNP that has modelled itself on an election winning machine with career politicians. To the point where I was asked by, I can't remember who, but some SNP MP, what is it you mean by career politician? And the only answer I could give him was, you. You're the career politician, because you will do anything to win your seat. You will do anything to keep a well-paid position. And, you know, it gets to a point where it begins to poison everything in the national politic. And, you know, it's tiring. And I think that tiredness has been behind the creation of ALPA.
The thing with Alpha, or Alba, because I can't really do the other pronunciation, was that the actual candidates were more like human beings than career politicians. We did some interviews, Dave and I, with them, and they had such a lot to bring. And they would have been fantastic, because we don't need career politicians to get you independence. No career politician can. It has to be rebels and human beings who have a cause, and the cause of independence first. So as for Blackford, to me it's embarrassing. The whole, every day he stood up and says Scotland will not be dragged out of the EU against our will, which is the only thing I ever remember him saying, and he said it over and over again. And then we were dragged out of the EU against our will. So what kind of authority does that guy have? And if he had like an ounce of self-respect, once we were dragged out, he really should have resigned, because he didn't do what he promised us. But of course he doesn't. We'll see any harm in lying to people.
It's good Scottish self-flagellation, isn't it? You know, masochists, much better getting beaten up and battered by the British state than actually rebelling against anything.
But they're not going to respect
It just shows you how much they've actually made so many of us docile, and how they have constructed a parliament that is toothless. They don't actually have to do anything. I mean, if you think about this election, bar that last minute, that awful photograph on the front of the Record, where a long interview with Nicola, where she said she was happy to work with Labour. And I don't know, 30, 40, 50 St. Nicola fans jumped onto my Twitter site to tell me that she was only talking about certain things, Gareth. You know, don't lose the place, keep the heat. Well, you had to remind them that Labour Party is implacably against independence of any kind. It detests the SNP. What is she doing, even suggesting that, when there is nothing at the moment for her to associate with in the Labour Party? I mean, it's just another indication of how much she's out of her depth, how inept she is as a statesperson. And I never said that 2 years ago. I kept being diplomatic and saying maybe she should step aside and leave it to a group of highly skilled constitutionalists who push the case for independence until the people realize that their rights don't exist just because they can go to the shops and choose which store they want to shop from. They can choose which school to send their children. They can choose which brand of car they want to buy. That's not freedom. That's consumerism. But they consider they don't have a problem with their life, really. Occasionally they've got money problems if they're middle class. And they don't realize that the greatest betrayal we have created is the betrayal of all those working class in Glasgow and Dundee who voted for independence. They knew better than anybody, including the politicians, what they had to do. And the rest of us, not us four here, I know we voted yes, but I mean in general, the 55%. Although it was Edinburgh University who, with some analysis, discovered that a huge percentage of the no's, the 55% no's, some who were weeping when they were lifting their pencil, you know, to put an X at the no, a great deal of them, over 30%, actually wanted more powers for Scotland, short of full autonomy. And so they were betrayed. So a huge percentage of the Scottish population were betrayed. And here we are again. We had a chance to try and pack the pews with our believers. And the minister at the pulpit locked the church doors on us. That's really what happened. So I have no love for the SNP hierarchy. You know, I differentiate them from the rank and file. And to be candid, I could not bring myself to vote for them the other day. I just couldn't do it. So I put my X for Alba and I wrote spoiled across the constitution, the
constituency one.
The constituency ballot paper. I was in that booth for about 5 minutes, you know, going over and over it and over it, thinking, this is not what I was told to do by Alex Salmond, but I can't trust the SNP anymore. I can't trust their politicians. I have lost complete trust in what they're doing and what they say. I don't know if you guys share it, but I see that coming up on my Twitter site every few tweets.
Well, no, I think that has been echoed right across social media with supporters for Alapa. And I got a great laugh yesterday because someone shared with me, you know, their own spoiled vote. And, you know, I certainly wasn't a fan of the idea of spoiling votes, but I certainly could feel the, you know, the something in my craw about marking an X for the SNP. But someone shared with me their spoiled vote, which was something I dearly appreciated. You know, instead of marking for SNP, they just wrote across the constituency paper, Bobby Sands MP. And I thought, that's beautiful. I love that. Thank you.
I mean, it's all really sad, but what of Indy? Where do we go from here? Where do the majority of the SNP supporters who still want independence, where do we go? Though that not the hierarchy. I mean, one thing for sure in politics, you are coerced and cajoled into following. And there's a positive for that, because when we went down in 2016, we were commended for our discipline, for marching in tune, you know. So, and I weighed that against some of the things that were going on in my opinion. I thought was maybe not. I mean, we had one real detailed debate. One detailed debate where Nicola came down. It was the first one that was on, do we vote on fox hunting or not, which is potentially an English only issue. And it's the only debate we ever had in any great detail where everyone had a chance to speak, and it nearly went against what Nicola's wishes were. Yeah. And guess what?
It's a nice, safe subject.
But there weren't any other debates that were detailed thereafter.
Yeah.
And you can think, well, okay, we don't have the time to do that on every subject. And you do want to be marching to the same tune because we're down there representing a cause. But whose cause became the question on many people's lips.
Well,
look at
Jason up there on my left. Look, he's taken to smoking again. I mean, it's look at him, poor sod. He's lighting one cigarette off the other cigarette.
I'm not sitting in a boudoir in Tehran drinking out an 80th birthday party cup.
Good spot.
I spotted that
Well,
a while ago, Phil.
I was going to come in with I do a bit of Polish, but I don't know Russian. Wee bit of Arabic. But
And
the Arabs are in.
Poor Denise, she's made such a huge sacrifice selling her furniture to pay for Alba. Placards and posters. She's sitting in an empty room.
No, everything's around me. You just can't see it. The thing about your discipline, I don't think you should have discipline. The only reason you need discipline is you want to curry favour with the mainstream press. If you give up on the mainstream press and realise that they're not going to support you anyway, why bother with discipline? Why don't you let people be human beings and vote with their principles?
Well,
No,
at one point
sorry,
I would
I'm
argue.
not an MP at the moment, but if you
Yeah.
were.
One point I would argue, point out there, Denise, I would say that on principle, I think that's admirable and the correct thing to do. Speaking the truth is one of the highest principles we have, and we should value it and we should give it more respect. However, when you have snipers on every rooftop gunning for you, and the slightest chink in your armour will be taken advantage of, and you look at the way that people were taken down and thrown under the bus, and I'm not just saying by the establishment. As soon as a weakness was noticed, or a flaw or a fallibility, there was concern amongst many that we ourselves were throwing our own under the bus.
You did. You
Yeah.
totally did. Michelle
Yeah.
Thompson, first
Terrible.
person,
Yeah.
nothing wrong at
Yeah.
all, straight under the
There was
bus.
that guy, McDonald.
Yeah, you continue to do it. And
Yep.
how
Yep.
can you be a team? Because you don't support each other.
Well, you
And
don't.
so-
You're out. The team is the in crowd, and you obey the rules, and that then you begin to wonder, well, what does that? Has anybody read 20th century history? Does anybody read Dostoevsky? Have you read the Gulag Archipelago? People obey the party. No, thank you.
And it's the
No, thank
party
you.
in power. It's keeping the party in power. The party is what you owe your loyalty to. But I think that's completely wrong. And no independence movement should have a party at the head of it that behaves in that way. It's completely counterproductive. And you should never throw your own team under the bus, because all it means is it makes everybody scared, and they're scared to speak up, and has a chilling effect on others. And that's what they do. They behave so badly to people like Joanna Cherry. It frightens other people from speaking up. They're scared. And most of the MSPs and MPs are probably very scared.
Sheepy.
What kind of environment is that? It makes people ill.
Denise,
know,
do you think? Sorry, do you think Alex Salmon would have done that?
No. But having said that, I wouldn't know, because maybe all politics are bad. Maybe they're just all politicians. But I do know when anybody got into trouble during the Albicide, he stood behind them. When Alex Arthur had written a tweet, when Jim, the economist, what's her name, had said cow, when everybody got stood behind, nobody got criticised. When some of the candidates were on the front of newspapers, Nicola would have them suspended before the newspaper went to print. But they were stood behind. So he stood behind every one of these candidates that came in for trouble. And Nicola stands behind only her friends.
That's called
And
leadership.
even if you're
she's
her
not going to
friend,
deliver.
it doesn't actually protect you, as Margaret.
We know
Mead
she is not going to deliver independence. We know that. She's not capable of it. I think we're all agreed on that one. So my logic tells me she's the wrong person in the wrong place at the wrong time. So she has to go. And earlier, Philip was asking, what do we do next? Well, I'm not a member of the SNP. I can't demand that she goes. That's up to the SNP, the membership themselves. But I think if some institutions, I can't see the SNP doing, but somebody has to show what the Tory party is doing now to remove powers from Scotland, to remove our rights, to hobble the Parliament till it truly is just a little, county talking shop, a little council meeting place. That might make people look at Nicola with a sidelong glance and say, we don't think you're up to this. Thank you for everything. Time to go. don't know when that's going to happen. She's got in her head that she's here till 2025. And maybe then she might think of a referendum, by which point Boris, of course, has
Gone.
nailed Holyrood right down if he hasn't set fire to the building. I'm expecting a Reichstag, you know. We've already lost the Glasgow School of Art, which took 2 burnings to make sure nothing was left of it. So I can't think why they wouldn't stop at burning down our overpriced Parliament.
I mean, the reason I was asking the question, it was the mechanism of Indy. I mean, from a strategic perspective, and we know some people are better strategic thinkers and planners than others. And you look at the time, and I'm involved in the legal game a bit, arbitration, dispute resolution, etc. And there's a couple of court cases coming up that will illustrate, expose, and show the public what's actually going on in our political landscape at the moment, particularly the 2 cases that Alex has set up. Now, the timing of that will be interesting, but you know, my thoughts were the very positivity of Alba in saying vote SNP1. This is it. This is the only way we can get a Section 10. This is how we can determine our own timeline, our own timetable for independence. But to rely on Section 30, I mean, really, is that it? Is that all we've got? Section 30? And Boris can say yea or nay?
Yeah.
I think where the trouble is, it's 5 years as Parliament, because they changed the law to make it 5 years. So it's not till 26. And we just have to really build for 26. Unfortunately, it makes 26 the independence referendum, where you're voting for independence. And it won't come from the SNP. It will not. So there needs to be, Alba Party needs to first do the local elections. They need to stand in the general elections against the SNP. And then they need to win, not a second vote, unless the SNP changes. They need to win the next Scottish election. That's really what they have to do. And that's the only hope for independence, because this SNP are not going to bring us independence. So we need a new party.
They're certainly not wildly keen on it.
No, we need a new party. And even if all that party does is cause ruction, you know, so there's 2 paths that can go on. We can get no independence. So there's 3 paths: no independence, and a decade or a generation ahead, and hope the youngsters, you know, get together. Or we can go on a path where Alba becomes strong and acts like Brexit did on the Tories, and forces the SNP to actually go on an independence route because they fear losing their seats to Alba. So they actually do try and deliver something before 2026, or Alba replaces the SNP. So it's no independence, force the SNP to do it, or none. So Alba needs to get electoral success. But there's other things I think as well, like demonstrations once COVID's over, you know, like demonstrations at the Parliament, demonstrations against the SNP, you know, not just fun demonstrations, demonstration against them and their policies.
On
That
my
would be my idea.
on my Twitter site this morning, somebody said something I thought was very interesting to Neil Mackay, who runs the Under Any Other banner marches. He said, no more marches, please. We camp outside our Parliament. The architect of our Parliament, the Spanish architect, originally designed, as you know, 3 upturned boats and a huge area to meet, for the public to meet outside. So it became a congregation of democracy. And then it was decided the public areas should be reduced. You know, we should have fingers of grass leading out to the park, and little ponds winding throughout them. So there's only a kind of area, a large section of pavement now, and even that's got a circular pond in the middle of it to keep numbers down. But that's what I think should be done. And I think we're at the stage, probably past the stage, where we should be getting involved in non-violent resistance.
What about the democratic process when we are now in the position where we're getting two, what I believe to be very unpopular policies about to be enacted through the Scottish Parliament, GRA and hate crime? When people become aware of this, and I genuinely, the same people I was speaking to, friends, intelligent, educated people who didn't really grasp the haunt because they weren't interested, weren't paying really attention to the detail and what was spoken about how we're getting to independence, have no idea what GRA and hate crime actually means to them and their wives and daughters or husbands and children.
Well, isn't it like going to your local supermarket and saying, well, everything's fine after Brexit. What was the problem about? And then suddenly discovering spot pricing. You know, the potatoes you bought last week are twice the price this week because they're twice as difficult to get. It's that kind of thing where people suddenly feel their lives are affected. And I'm not sure if GRA will affect women until they discover public toilets are full of
changing rooms.
Changing rooms. And so they're...
there's a £5 million refurbishment going to a toilet in Edinburgh.
The Victorian phrase is a urinary leash or lead that the Victorians put on women. Women could only go so far because there wasn't any toilet. They couldn't go to the toilet anywhere. And that's really what we're instituting, you know. Nicola's doing a really good job of destroying women's rights.
Well, she's got, as I just said, there's a toilet they're spending £5 million on in Edinburgh, I believe. Turn it into a unisex toilet.
Yeah.
£5 million, that would stock a lot of food banks. That would help lot of people.
Here's local democracy at work, you know, where suddenly you said, how did that happen? Did I vote for that with the council? You know, like my local, when did they pass that? 5 million, you know, and I've just paid £120 for a new front headlight for my car because the damn suspension dropped in a giant pothole in the middle of Scotland's capital. Why are they spending £5 million? You know, look at all these, look at all the food banks. You know, if you're a good unionist, you say, well, food banks are an indication of a society that cares. You know, a food bank is a good indication of a society that doesn't care a damn about the poor and the starving. So I know I've been there, and I know probably all of you at some point in your lives have been there. So we have this weird existence where a council that's getting its budgets cut because the Scottish government is getting its annual allowance reduced by the Tory party to squeeze it till the pips squeak, is spending £5 million on making new toilets. I mean, why don't they dispense with that and just get a B&Q hut and dig a big hole inside it, you know, put a plank across it, and some cut up newspapers from the Daily Record, some pages on a bit of string. That's a lot cheaper. Stick them in all the roundabouts now in Edinburgh where they've got advertise here.
But the thing about the women's rights point is that a lot of it is controlled by the council, and the council elections is next year. So Alba really need to get organised for the council elections, and it's STV.
That's a good
so
point.
Again, it's a good way of getting representation. So I think, you know, once everybody kind of gets over this, it's the council elections. Get enough councillors, and they will be in charge of things like unisex toilets and changing rooms. And the council chambers have got a lot of power over a lot of things that would affect women. So there's that. And then there's the protests. Women already have done quite a few protests. And just before lockdown, we had a protest outside the Scottish Parliament, which was well attended. I attended just before lockdown. So we would have protests and make sure that people understand what's going on. But it's hard during lockdown.
Well, I think one protest we should start with.
Just before that, do you know women get police visits by writing chalk? Things like women's rights are not a hate crime. 2 women I know had 2 police people go around and one was told any more of it and you might get charged with breach of the peace for writing chalk. And the MPs complain when they put ribbons and things outside the offices. I think it was I don't know who the MSP and MP was, but they threatened the women with reporting them to the police. So you're in a pandemic, your opportunities for protest, and it's a right. Political protest is a right, the same as free expression is a right. And our rights are just being ignored completely. And a chilling effect of having police come is a offence against the right of freedom of expression. So that's the Scotland we live in.
Maybe, Denise, that's a really good answer to Philip's question. What do we do next? Well, we maybe concentrate on women who are not necessarily religious believers in the sanctity of Saint Nicola, and tell them your rights are about to be removed.
Not just women, it's men as well.
Well,
everybody's.
I agree. Well, I've got 2 daughters and a feminist wife.
Yeah.
Who doesn't think you need to have feminist after your name? You know, it's not a career choice. You're born a woman. You're born a feminist if you're a woman.
No, I totally agree, and I've got daughters, and that's the whole point of this. I mean, I'll do something about it. I'm a father, and I want, I want equal opportunities, obviously, but I don't want to take my 15-year-old daughter to the swimming pool. She goes into one changing room, I go into another, and a guy puts a dress on, some lipstick, and walks in behind her. No, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. And we're talking about the hate crime, freedom of speech. You nailed it, Denise, because freedom of speech is the freedom with which we protect all other rights. Yes. And to lock that down with the hate crime bill, where you can be sitting at a dinner table, and this goes back to the Stasi. It was in communist Russia, 3 out of 5 people were informers. At your home, at your dinner table, you can be reported for stating that I don't think a trans woman is a real woman. And you can actually be prosecuted for that, for speaking that at your own table. Where are we going with this? Have people thought this through? Clearly not. And we've got to stand up. You've got to stand up. Being silent on this is not acceptable.
Oh, the hate crime bill is just alarming. It's seriously alarming. There's a good Russian joke about somebody standing in a bread queue in Moscow, and he starts to fume, and the woman in front turns around and said, "What's wrong, comrade? We all have to queue for bread. It's part of being Russian." And he said, "I can't take any more of this." He said, "This is the 5th time this week, and I haven't even got to the front of the queue yet. I am going to go away, find out where that bastard Pugin lives, and I'm going to beat the living daylights out of him." And he disappears. Anyway, next day he's back in the same queue, and the woman turns around and said, "Good to see you again here, comrade. So, you found Putin?" "I did," he said. "You found where he lived?" "I certainly did." "And so you beat him up?" "No, there was another queue." The Russians dine out on that one.
That's no way to talk about our sponsor, Gareth.
Eh?
That's no way to talk about our sponsor, Vlad.
I remember, listen, I was young enough to remember Khrushchev in the United Nations. Nobody would listen to him, so he took his shoe off and he started banging it on his desk to get attention.
Yeah, it was Harold Macmillan did a beautiful one-line at that time, and I thought you would have something to say. I'm showing my age here as well. Terrible. I was just going to say, when we were talking a few topics ago about protests, I'm old enough as well to remember the protest at the Royal High School after we were cheated out of our assembly, and that stayed for 20 odd years then until they opened up the new parliament. And maybe now it's something maybe the guys outside there should think about, is maybe we need to put another independence camp outside Holyrood, just to remind the SNP every day they go in why they're in there and what their job is. They've got one job, It's got nothing to do with building unisex toilets or unisex swimming pool changing rooms. It's all to do with independence. And maybe we need to remind them of that every single day in life till they actually do something about it.
Well,
Yeah, for sure. Something's got to be done. The message has got to get out there, and one of the big things is communicating to people. And I think when you're paying attention and you're looking at some of the details, and nobody can know all because there's that much information out there, we forget that it's the very simple basics that most people don't have time. They've just got busy lives. They don't have time to understand how Dawn works. They don't have the time. Maybe I've got the kids to pick up from school. I've got my job. I've got to, problems with the family. I mean, there are other priorities in life for most of us. And so what little time we afford to understanding political activism or politics, I think that our focus ought to be on, or anyone who's independently minded, their focus has got to be upon getting the simple truths out there, the simple messages. Keep it simple, stupid, that classic Americanism. It's the only thing that'll work, I think. Because you get wrapped up in the detail, it gets overly complicated, issues are conflated with other issues, and arguments are very, very easily lost. If you keep it simple and keep it truthful, I think much better chance.
Yeah, I think you just have to say people need an instruction, I think, not an explanation, especially towards the actual day where they vote. So if you say, that was the problem, they said both votes SNP, that was an instruction. And because there was trust, they took that instruction. We could say, vote Alba for independence. That's an instruction. So I think sometimes we don't need to explain, we just need to instruct. This is what you do if you want independence.
I tell you what crossed my mind the other day, and it didn't issue from my own predicament. I thought of all the people who have died, who fought for Scotland's liberty all their lives, and watched, one failure after another until the SNP got in, and then discovered that the SNP are not capable of securing Scotland's self-governance either. That they have a leader who is burdened by a colonial mentality, who somehow doesn't think the worst opponent of Scotland is the brutality of the British state, who's not going to, it's not going to give up its territorial possession without a fight. And these people have passed on, and others will before 2026. I find that really sad, especially when they gave up so much to make things better for the rest of us. I suppose some of us, like myself, who have Irish heritage, could have got an Irish passport, so we die in an independent country. But for the majority of us, if we think it's futile, we're trapped here. So I didn't mean to depress the atmosphere, my friends, but I don't think it crosses Nicola Sturgeon's mind.
No, I think you're probably right, Gareth. Well, we're just about to get a new guest in. In fact, I believe you're wanting a wee break, Denise.
No, yeah, I'll have a break.
No, she's quite fit.
Well, I think we're about to. We'll just the famous. There we go. See, it works every time. It's amazing. This is Donald doing his magical stuff behind the scenes. Colette, we're joined now by Colette Walker of the leader of the ISP.
Hi, Colette.
Big welcome, Colette, to you.
Good afternoon, Roddy.
Good afternoon. Not bad. Can I just say before we get started and have a wee chat, Colette, I'd like to say congratulations, thank you very magnanimous of your party to step aside and do the right thing for Scotland, which you thought at the time. I just wish the SNP had had the same view of politics that is all about the big picture and the cause. So I'd just like to register in public my appreciation of your selfless act.
Well, thank you for that. It wasn't an easy decision. We worked really hard. Yesterday was our 1 year anniversary of being approved. So there'd been an awful lot of real hard work been put in by everyone in ISP, and even more so the candidates that were all ready to start their campaign. So, it wasn't an easy decision. I had to take into everybody, the members and the candidates, and everybody's point of view and their opinions. So, yes, but at the end of the day, we done what everybody unanimously thought was right. The majority of everybody thought it was the best thing to stand down, and that's what we did. So, but we are still here. We're moving forward and onwards and upwards.
And you'll be standing in the council elections next year in force?
Absolutely, yes. We've already started doing work for the year ahead, because again, we're saying next May. It seems a long time away, but when you consider, like as I said, yesterday was our 1 year anniversary. Time goes by in lightning, really, when you're having to prepare for any type of election. So, even though it seems a long time away now, it really isn't, in all due consideration with everything that has to be put in place. So a lot of work to get done, but we've already started that process.
That's excellent to hear, because I think that certainly there's got to be a lot of collaboration, and I would hope that the Alapa Party, ISP, AFI, hopefully, who also I would like to register my public appreciation of for their stance as well as standing down. I hope, and Scotia Future, if they're also going to stand, there should be a lot of collaboration between the parties to make sure that we maximise the pro-independence vote. Well, I think that there's an awful lot of seats in councils around Scotland. So I think if we work together, there's many seats there to be taken, a lot more than obviously the Scottish elections. So there's plenty of seats to be had with the local councils. And what you were saying earlier on, local government has a lot of responsibility. I think a lot of people dismiss what can actually be done in local government, and a lot of people don't actually understand what the role of a councillor actually is in your local community. So again, I think it's about educating people. We've all been talking about educating people about the deont system, and that is very complicated. But I think also trying to educate people on what actually the different roles are within elected office within Scotland, whether it's a councillor or an MSP or an MP. I think a lot of people get very confused about what that actual role, what that role entails, and what you're responsible for, and what actual benefits you can do to your local community. And we're better than dealing with local issues is within your local community by being a councillor. So yeah, I think everybody should actually we should actually all be working together to get as many seats within our local authorities as possible. Absolutely, great to hear. And what did you make of yesterday? What's your take on the election so far? Unfortunately, nothing really came to too much of a surprise to me, to be fair, with obviously the SNP doing both votes 1 and 2. It was they put on a very strong campaign, and again, a lot of the SNP loyalists and people that are going to trust the SNP are just going to continue going down that road, even though as this you've been talking about earlier on, but ISP have been for the past year talking about the deont system
and put out all the videos that we put out, trying to educate people, showing them the wasted votes that there were in 2016. But, you know, for some reason, people just don't want to hear that. They see the SNP 1 and 2, and again, because what they were saying about the 2011 election, which was a total fluke. You know, it was a total fluke. There was a lot of transition between people leaving Labour, going to SNP. You know, there was a lot going on in that election. And unfortunately, they were using that election as part of their campaign. So people weren't taking into consideration anybody that was saying, such as ISP, well, you would have to lose about 20 constituency seats before you even got anywhere near what happened in 2011. So unfortunately, a lot of people are just not willing to listen. They just are very focused on the party that they're supporting, or the person in the party they're supporting.
That's it. Before we go for Gareth, can I just thank you for a second? We're going to swap you out with Big Ian for a while. Don't go away. We will require you later if you're feeling up to it, my friend.
Okay.
But thank you so far for your contribution.
Oh, you're welcome.
Pleasure.
But we'll hopefully see you again later. So, yeah, a very good synopsis there of it all, Colette. You read it well, and but it's as we've been saying all day, and for the people out there especially, this is just the start of the independence campaign. This is just the start. We're going to go in from strength to strength with Alapa, with ISP, with AFI, with Scotia Future, and anyone else who cares to join us in the fight. And welcome back, Mr. Lawson. That must have been a 5-course meal you had.
No, it wasn't. It took me a while to get through my sandwich, which I actually ate before I went off. But I had to let my dogs out, and that comes high up the list of priorities. I'm a pet lover, so I managed to do that without them barking. They're already on a yellow card. They know one more offence.
Yeah, well, I was sitting here, the smell of barbecue was reaching to me. That's why I had to leave earlier. Got a nice bit of barbecue. Keep us
Lovely.
going.
Can I perhaps ask Colette, perhaps
well,
quite a difficult question, Colette? I know that we've talked about how going forward there has to be a collegiate approach. When you look at the Greens, Alba, I mean, the Greens stood against the SNP in 12 constituency seats. You have yourselves and AFIs and others standing down. But there was a lot of talk about trying to pull together the other smaller independents, new parties, into a more concerted group effort, and it failed. The Greens completely are out on their own and standing against SNP in 12 different seats. If this is to work, how would you go about it, Colette? I mean, you've had the conversations with the other senior members, and obviously there will be confidential issues and there'll be things that you can and cannot say. But is there hope that we can put aside these little differences, be it right or left or quasi-right or left, and actually work together to assign a portion and optimise this opportunity?
It just really depends. You know, a week is a long time in politics and nobody knows. But I think as far as I know, like AFI said that they were deregistering, so I don't actually know what their plans are going to be. As far as ISP are concerned, you know, as I said a few minutes ago, we're already making plans to contest, you know, in the local elections next year. If there is any by-elections, fair enough, we possibly go for them as well if we can. But you know, next year is a big year for local council elections. So I feel that we really need to speak to each other to try and get as many of the local wards covered by as many independent voting candidates as possible. And I think it's about raising profile as well. And again, I think we have to, for the soft nose and the doubters, the unsure, I think we have to also let them know that we have other issues at our hearts as well. You know, we have local issues that we are very much aware of, and we want to change, and we want to push for change in a positive way. So I think it's all about raising profile as well over this past year. You know, Alapa came in very late, so that, you know, okay, a lot of people will know Alex Salmond, but they not necessarily know an awful lot of the actual candidates. So for that to, you know, so the profiling, I think, is really, really important. I just saw there that Andy Doig from Scotia Future, you know, he was going for the constituency and for the regional, and he actually, you know, done really quite well, and he's already a councillor. So it just shows you that, you know, the profiling, people getting to know you and your party and what you stand for, I think is actually really important. So I think really just now we have to regroup. You know, we've had time, we've had these few weeks, you know, what Alapa are going through just now, we went through a few weeks ago when we decided to stand down. You know, we all went from about 100 mile an hour working all the time leading up to the election to then standing down, and you know, there was a lot of reflection had to be done, and regrouping and starting again, and Alapa are going to do exactly the same over the next couple of days, but it's about getting back on and just getting back on with the job. But there's a lot more to do. There's a lot more to do within, you know, council and policies, and just keeping the profile going, and giving people there that wee bit more hope for the future, that they have people that they can trust. So yeah, there's a lot to be there's a lot to be done, and I'm sure that well, you know, who knows? You know, I know that you have been talking about 2026. We just don't know. Let's be optimistic. Maybe there will be an independence referendum in a couple of years. You know, let's. You know,
I don't think so.
No,
I don't think so.
I admire your optimism. But can I just go back to the councils, Colette? But the good thing about the council, surely, Colette, is that we have STV, and there are, you know, you've got, was it nine preferences you can put down. So that makes a big difference in comparison to the voting system for Holyrood. So there's a lot. It's going to be easier, in my humble opinion, I speak as an outsider, for collaboration between the pro-independence parties to support each other.
Can I add to that question as well?
Oh,
sorry, can I add to that question where Roddy's pointing out, not just the system, the voting system's fairer and more usable, user-friendly. You've got people like, obviously your one of your leaders is Julie McAnulty, who's got a very strong local profile. Mm-hmm. And if the parties are honest with each other about where their strengths lies locally, I mean, the conflation in politics is often about devolved, reserved, and local. People don't understand generally, they don't have time to realise just how important your local representation is and how strong that local presence is. You don't need banners, you don't need national campaigns. You need somebody like Julie, who's very well known and liked in a particular area, in a particular ward, that has a serious chance. Even as an independent, she ran the big ones close, you know. But with a concerted effort and a national campaign that is pulling together all of these disparate units that have the same goal and that positive outcome, is that something you would be trying to focus on, Colette?
Yeah, I totally agree. It's about, and I've spoke to, you know, my candidates and members, that it's really important that, you know, you get your profile known within your local area, and again, it doesn't have to be about protests. It could be that you do, you know, if you're working in, like what you were talking about earlier on, a food bank, you know, which is disgusting that we still have them in 2021. But, you know, if people see that you're working within your community, and you're trying to, you know, improve people's quality of life for whatever reason, you know, for the likes of myself here in East Renfrewshire and Eastwood, you know, I started up the access panel in East Renfrewshire, and a lot of people, and even the councillors that we had here in East Renfrewshire, didn't actually know what an access panel was. It was only when I discussed it with them to actually put that I wanted an access panel within East Renfrewshire, that they were educated on what an access panel. And again, if people don't know what an access panel is here, an access panel is a group of normally majority disabled people who are going to go and make sure that the indoor and outdoor environment, buildings and outdoor places within their local community are accessible for everybody. You know, they talk it to the planning people within the council. You know, they go and check all the amenities, make sure that everything's accessible, or they make recommendations for things to be changed. But it's obviously prevention rather than cure, so it's always better to talk to the planners beforehand. So again, you know, there's things within your community you can do, and if you get to be known within your community, people then trust that, you know, you as an individual. And I would say local council, there's quite a lot of independent councillors out there because of maybe the work that they've already been seen to have done already. So yeah, it's all about building profile and making, you know, people feel secure that their vote then is going to someone that's actually going to try and improve the local area. And like what you were talking there about, for example, like the GRA, I am concerned that obviously I think that's probably going to be one of the first things that's going to be tried to get put through the Scottish Parliament. And again, what Denise said earlier on, it's not about just women, it's not just about girls, it is about everybody. Everybody is at risk with the GRA reform bill. For example, like my son who's in social care, you know, his rights could be affected by it, by the GRA reform bill. So, you know, I mean, there's a lot of issues within that, you know, if you were in the local council area, you could be talking to the people with education and social care and putting the points across to them on a one-to-one basis.
Can I just say, while I was off there having a little rest, I was listening to Angus Robertson, who was explaining that the SNP would pursue independence with all vigour once the pandemic was over. And he then went on to explain he wasn't just talking about the actual virus itself, he was also talking about the economic consequences of the pandemic and all the rest of it. Now, when the BBC interviewer said to him, well, you know, that could last longer than the next Parliament, he replied, I am confident within the next Parliament we will put legislation forward for a new referendum. That's not putting forward a referendum. That's talking about being confident of putting the legislation through for a referendum. So, I mean, the action replay of what we've just been going through in this election is about to be replayed all over again, because the likelihood is, and it would be my forecast, that 2 or 3 years into this particular Parliament, at the most, Nicola will stand down. She will go and get a job somewhere, high-profile job outside Scotland. And it'll be Angus Robertson, her approved successor, who will take over. And it's quite clear he's got no urgent plans at all for a referendum. It done that to me as well. That's that stunned thinking. My goodness.
I think was that maybe not what was a lot of people's thinking, is why Angus was coming forward, just in case there was going to be a leadership later on in the Parliament. Not necessarily at the very start, but maybe later on.
Well, I think it's likely. I mean, he would be Nicola's successor. I mean, him and his family have worked very closely with Nicola in recent times.
Oh yeah, very closely.
It'll be interesting to see who her cabinet, who she chooses as the ministers. You know, it will be interesting to see who gets elected as our ministers.
Well, she's lost some good ones. I mean, the health minister was a good one. Mike Russell, was a good one. I was pleased to see Jim Fairley won in Perthshire. That was quite an achievement, given it was very marginal and Rosanna Cunningham had stood down. So that was a good result for the SNP there. But, I mean, it's not looking likely there's going to be an SNP majority. They'll be relying on the Greens, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But on Jim Fairley, I heard that because he's not one of the inner circle and not one of the Wokarati, he wasn't getting much help from Edinburgh, so my sources told me. So even bigger result for him.
Absolutely. And I mean, he increased the majority as well. So, I mean, it was quite an achievement. But he comes from a good family. I remember the Jim Fairley of old, who was one of the most effective fundamentalist members of the National Executive when I first joined it. He was a very able man.
There's still a few there, I'm sure. I'm still sure.
I'm not sure on the NEC. I think most of the fundamentalists,
Phil, my friend, we're just about to switch you out for Tommy Sheridan.
Good.
But don't go away, because we'll probably want you back very shortly, my friend.
Here we go. It's all the best. A pleasure.
Thank you for your
nice seeing you, Phil.
Pleasure.
See you later, Phil.
Nice to see you, Claire.
See you later, Phil.
Well, here we are now. We're going to. I think I should get my Russian hat back on again quickly. Well, there he is, Mr. Sheridan. How are you? Did you enjoy yourself in the Blue Room?
Do you know, it's typical, Roddy. I've been waiting so long to hear from somebody from Alapa on the TV, and Chris is now on the BBC just as you guys come in, and I can't hear him. So, there you go. He's actually been on quite long, so that's why it's interesting, because usually they give you a couple of sound bites and then you're off. But they've actually kept him on quite long, so they've been interesting to hear what he's saying. The gist of his first statement was that Alapa is here to stay, which is interesting. I hope that is followed through, and I hope that's right. And he also went on to suggest, which I think has an element of truth to it, which is that some of the increased SNP votes during this election may very well have been down to Alapa. Even if it was only a few thousand here and there, because obviously there was a lot of disillusionment by some people in terms of the direction the SNP has been taking over the last few years, and some were saying they weren't going to vote at all. Some were then saying they were going to spoil their first vote. And I think the important thing that Alapa did was he said, don't be silly. Let's have both votes yes, both votes independence. That means one SNP, two Alapa. And I think that way will have increased SNP votes in certain key areas. And I think that's important.
Yeah, well, actually, Alec pointed out, when Alex Salmond was on earlier, he actually pointed that out. They certainly think that the seat in Ayr and the seat in Banff would not have been won by the SNP if it hadn't been for the Alapa vote, because it kind of coincided with the victories. So that's where we're at. What was your overall impression of the? I mean, we were talking at the start of this show, Tommy, that the great SNP victory of yesterday will be whittling away as the unionists start loading up on the list because of the SNP 1-2 tactic. But what was your view of the whole thing?
Roddy, I've been thinking about this overnight, and I was discussing with my wife Gail, and I was recalling, and this is an important wee reflection. I was recalling how I felt in 2007. I'm sorry to take you back so long, but I'm going to take you back to 2007. I had considerably more hair in those days, but however, I remember the narrow defeat I had in 2007. We had a big fallout within the SSP. I had launched Solidarity. The election itself was very, very polarised between the SNP and Labour, because there was a realistic chance that the SNP could actually become a majority. So it was very, very polarised election. And I lost in Glasgow by less than 1%. So I was personally gutted But I get interviewed by Bernard Ponsonby up at just outside the SNP on the bridge, just outside the STV headquarters on the bridge. And Bernard says to me, Tommy, you must be very disappointed, etc., etc. And I said, yes, I am very disappointed, but I am also very pleased because Scotland tonight has moved to the left. Scotland has voted for the SNP and said no to war, said no to nuclear weapons, said no to PFI. They've said yes to welcoming refugees. They have rejected the new Labour agenda. And therefore, Roddy, although I'm gutted this time around 2021, as I was in 2007, I do think we also have to have the bigger picture that the overwhelming majority of SNP voters don't know about the machinations. They don't know about the internal deceit that's going on. All they're doing is voting for independence. That's why they're voting SNP. And the result that will be announced today and was announced yesterday was a victory for independence. And so I want to keep that in mind, even though I'm dead disappointed that Alapa didn't make the breakthrough. So that's my wee take on it, Roddy, that yes, we have to have a recognition of we've not reached the heights that we hope to reach, but the glass is half full rather than half empty.
I love your positivity, Tommy. It's always with you. That's a great thing. We were talking just before you come on with Colette about the council elections next year, and because of this single transferable vote, there is a great opportunity for the pro-independence parties to collaborate to, lock out the unionists the way they've been locking out the SNP and a lot of the councils, and to get the message out. Do you see that as a good way of going forward, a good tactic, if they all collaborate together?
It's something that's worth discussing, Roddy. I'm not going to discount it. All I would say is it's 12 months away, and in the next 12 months, I do think all of us have got a job to do to get back into regenerating the grassroots. The SNP were forced into a position of saying that if they won this election, then IndyRef 2 would happen. You and I know they will do anything in their power to delay it, but surely the election itself has undermined many of their arguments about we can't have a referendum until the recovery. Well, we had an election and we're not recovered. And not only do we have an election, but we had an election with the highest turnout in the Scottish Parliament's history. This is the biggest turnout we've had. In some of the areas, it's up 10%. So that undermines this idea of, well, you can't have a referendum during a recovery from the pandemic. So I think the next 12 months, as well as thinking about council elections, yes, they're important. I think we've also got to re-engage and re-energise the grassroots movement. We've got to get back on the streets. We're going to have more marches and rallies, and we're going to have to give self-confidence back to the grassroots.
Well said. What are you thinking that, Ian?
Well,
Well, dogs, they're going to have to go, Ian. Shoot the dogs.
Shoot the dogs, that's a red card.
See, even the dogs in the street know I'm right.
I agree with you totally, Tommy. But the other thing we should be demanding, absolutely demanding, is the SNP representatives are much more forthright. And when we hear this nonsense about the recovery is the important thing, they've got to be challenged every time. How do you recover by leaving all the powers in the hands of Boris Johnson, who nobody supports in Scotland? If you want to recover, you need to have the powers here. And it's absolutely traitorous for SNP people to be interviewed and not to say that.
Definitely.
They're getting away with default. All the unionist parties talk about the recovery, and that's the most important thing. But none of them can tell you how you're going to do it when Boris controls all the powers. That's the route we need to take, along with, as you say, getting the grassroots out there demanding action.
I endorse it 100%, Roddy. The point that Ian and I and others, I think, are all making, and we have to continue to make, is absolutely inseparable that you can have a recovery for Scotland from the COVID pandemic and not have independence. There's no going back. Let's not go back to paying care workers poverty wages. Let's not go back to starving our public services. Let's not go back to the idea that benefits actually perpetuate poverty rather than lift people out of poverty. If we want to go forward, we need the powers of an independent country that lifts everybody into a better and higher standard of living. So recovery and independence are integrally linked. It's a hand in a glove.
Oh, I totally agree with you. And it's our job as the Yes Movement. As I say, we're a wee bit battered and bruised, no doubt about it. But you know, bruises soon go away, and the battering you forget quick enough. And we've got to, as you say, Tommy, get back out when things permit. We've got to get back out there, and we've got to get our voice heard. And I think, if I could just slightly take in UK politics for a second, I think both the Tories and up here, they've been getting away with murder because the people have been not able to express themselves because of COVID. And they keep doing what they think. Well, it seems everything's okay, so we'll just keep going on with this. I think when the public can, they will make their feelings known.
Yeah, I think Colette was wanting to say something.
Yeah,
so I don't want to say anything.
You're talking about the UK politics. One thing that I would say is when we look at what was happening in England yesterday with the voting, how Labour were doing so badly that people weren't turning to an independent candidate or even for example Greens, for example. They were turning to the Tories. They were going to the Tories. So the Tories, for some reason, I don't know why, but they're getting more power down in England. And we really have to think then that at the end of the day, if they're going to get even more power with people turning from Labour to Tory for whatever reason, it's given us even more incentive to become an independent Scotland, because we're never going to get a say. We never have had a say, and we never will. So if we really want, to re-energise and build Scotland, then we do have to become independent, and we need to do it as quickly as we possibly can. But obviously that's out of our hands at the present moment. We really need to keep pushing the SNP. It's in their hands. But as you said, Tommy, we were able to have an election through this, and time will tell. But we can only hope that what was promised to us will be given. So we'll wait and see. But I'm not overly hopeful, but I do.
Colette, the point I would love to make about the UK side of it, and I think it's very, very important to highlight, is that what happened yesterday was the clear delineation of the three different nations. There is no UK as a nation. There are three different countries. Wales has endorsed the Labour Party because they've rejected the British establishment lackey approach of Starmer. We've rejected the Tories because we've not accepted them since 1955. And sadly, parts of England have embraced and accepted the Tories because, in my opinion, there's no a credible alternative. The one part, I don't know if you've seen this we result, but the one part of England that rejected Labour and embraced the Greens, and they actually won a seat, was in the area where the chant of "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn" was actually born, and in that area they voted for the Greens. So there's obviously a lot of young people who are interested in radical, fundamental change in their lives and the redistribution of wealth. Starmer doesn't offer that. Corbyn did, and the establishment killed him for it. Now, Jeremy and I disagreed on independence, although, give him his due, he did say that if the Scottish Parliament voted for India F2, then he wouldn't stand in its way, and then he was slaughtered for it by his own cabinet. But from my point of view, Starmer represents nothing more than a red Tory, and that crystallises the fact England is different from Scotland. The need to leave this unholy union is now being advanced even more by these election results.
Absolutely.
We know that they were always going to change the dynamic. Like they say, you know, if SNP get a majority, well, they know that that's, you know, they can have a majority government and that's fine. They can get the 65 seats. But then they would say, oh, but then they might twist it. Oh, yes, but you don't have a super majority. You don't have your 86 seats, whatever. They're going to twist it all every which way they can. They won't take into consideration any other independent MSPs that are elected from another party or an independent. But I had to laugh when you were talking about Bernard interviewing. You know, he interviewed Douglas Ross yesterday, and you know, he was saying if they have a majority of MSPs that are independent supporters, does that not mean then that they have a mandate to go forward for an indie ref? And you know, he kept dodging the question, but then Bernard said, well, is that not what happened to the Tories with Brexit? You know, you were voted in and you had a mandate to go ahead with Brexit, and that's what you've done. So is that not the same then for Scotland? And he got himself so flummoxed with it, he really wasn't happy. But he kept saying, oh, well, you know, there's no leader of a Conservative party that's going to say that, you know, they're going to grant an indie referendum. And then you're like, so it's good for the goose, but it's not good for the gander. You know?
I'm just surprised he didn't just go, you just can't, Bernard. You just can't, Bernard. I'm surprised to say, but Colette, can I just say to you, can I thank you very much for your participation at this moment? We're about to switch you out just now, but please don't go away in case we're needing you right back in here.
Excellent, no bother. Thanks a lot.
Speak to you soon, my friend.
See you
Take
later.
care.
Cheers.
So on the Jeremy Corbyn thing, I've been advocating for a while. Our progressives, I would suggest, down in England. Welcome back, Denise. The progressives. I know you're a big Tommy fan. That's why we brought you back in here. The progressives down in England have surely got to look at the Labour Party and think this is not fit for purpose. I advocate that they need to do something. They need to bring in a left of centre social democratic. Whether that's the Greens, I don't know, or a new outfit. What do you think on that?
About what Labour should do?
No, I was actually asking Tommy, but Denise, you as well.
I actually thought you were asking Denise as well there. Sorry, great to see Denise. Personally, Roddy, I don't think it's any secret that I've been a socialist all my adult life, and therefore I'm very interested in a socialist movement in England, Wales and in Scotland. But in England in particular, my gripe is with the trade union movement, who are very, very powerful, very, very well financed. Without them, the Labour Party would collapse. And yet, many of them continue to support a party which attacks their own members' rights. Howard Beckett, the candidate for Unite, put out a tweet yesterday. I don't know if some of you seen it. He said, I've held on to this. He said, I didn't want to reveal it before the ballot. He says, but the one party leader who was expected to sign the motion calling for the abolition of the fire and rehire policy that's been used by Asda, been used by British Gas, and has now been targeted by all the big companies, which is reducing the wages and conditions of ordinary workers all across the UK. The one leader who was expected to sign, but who's refused to sign, is Keir Starmer. He's not even willing to sign up to a charter to abolish the idea of the fire and rehire policy, which is designed to lower the wages and conditions of ordinary working class people. That is a damn disgrace. So the idea that they continue to fund that party with their members' subs is ridiculous. They've got to either establish a new party or stop funding the Labour Party. Very, very quickly, Roddy, I remember being in London in 2013. I was invited down there to do a couple of meetings about the bedroom tax. I was speaking at a couple of big events about our campaign against the bedroom tax up in Scotland. And I met up with Len McCluskey and a few others. And at that time, they were considering the formation of a new party. That they were actively considering it. But what they said, and this is where I had a debate with them, he said, we're going to wait till after the general election, which was 2015, because if we go now then we may lose representatives in the Parliament. I was arguing, no, for goodness sake, go now. You'll attract the best. You'll win seats, etc., etc. Anyway, we had that debate. I lost that debate. We never fell out or anything. And then, by a quirk of fate, in 2015, Jeremy Corbyn was nominated for the leadership. Nobody thought he would get enough nominations to stand. He did. And then, of course, he won against all the odds. And the whole idea of a new party was obviously shelved thereafter. And they tried to build support around him. So it just shows you how things can sometimes have their own wee life of their own. That was a quirk that Jeremy won the nomination. He wasn't expected to get enough nominations to even get into the contest. But not only did he get into the contest, he actually won. Since then, personally, if you look at the 2017 election, Roddy, I argued up here in Scotland, first vote SNP. Everybody in Scotland should vote SNP, but everybody in England should vote Labour, they should vote Corbyn. And I remember people saying, Tommy, what are you doing? You're backing somebody who's going to get absolutely trounced. There's no way people will support Corbyn. He's calling for too many radical policies. Jeremy Corbyn in 2017 is very easy to forget. He got the biggest swing to the Labour Party since 1945. That's how good his result was in 2017.
But what's happened now, do you think, here in Scotland, and without the Tories running amok down in England, and the SNP on the first past the post systems running amok up, and do you think something could be said? I mean, political scientists maybe need to answer this question, but the Brexit and the pandemic, Denise, do you think that's made people, well, better the devil we know, and have decided to stay with the Tories in England and with the SNP in Scotland, and not to go for radical change in Scotland by Alapa 2? Is there any link there, do you think?
I don't think so, because it's quite different, you know, given Alapa's 6 weeks old and the Labour Party is 100 and more years old. So, and Labour have got a brand, you know, they've built. I think the problem Labour has is that they misjudge the English people as opposed to the Scottish people, because I think English people are very aspirational in general. So they are, they want to be rich. And in one of the debates, I remember getting at this man complaining about the Labour putting tax on people earning over 80,000. And the Labour guy is like, you don't need to worry about that. You'll never earn over 80,000. And for English people, that was like, you know, and I think for Scottish people as well, I don't think that would work well here either, because people don't want to tell people to tell them that they're never going to get on and be rich and earn 80,000. People are aspirational, and Labour in England, they're not playing to the aspirations of the English people, and that's why I think they're getting lost. And Boris, for all his faults, he does, you know, and he does the, you know, the American presidential idea of the guy you'd want to have a pint with down the pub. He puts on an act. He acts all the time. You know, he's got this act. So I think that Labour are in a very bad way, because they're not offering anything at all to the communities, and they're not offering them that we're going to, you know, get you out of your.
What do you think?
Bad.
Ian, do you think that there's anything to do with pandemic and Brexit that's made people to stay with what they're familiar with? You're on mute. You're muted, Ian. I can't hear you.
All right, sorry. I think across the UK, when you look at the results, there's some evidence of that. I mean, Labour have done well in Wales. I think it's generally accepted that the Labour First Minister down there handled the pandemic better than Boris. I think Nicola's undoubtedly, you know, had more support for her better communication skills than Boris's. So, you know, I think there has been a COVID factor, and I think people were reluctant, you know, to move away while the pandemic's still in operation and go to a completely risky. I think the situation in Scotland is completely different. I mean, I was brought up in Clydebank, you know, the absolute heart of the Labour Party, the beating heart on Clyde side all these years. And Labour had in Clydebank an enormous organisation. I mean, right through the trade union movement, right through community councils, well, not community councils, through communities. Labour folk run everything. Now you look at these communities today and Labour's nowhere to be seen. And Tommy's right about the union funding. I mean, I've never understood why the SNP trade union group haven't been a lot more aggressive in sitting down with these union leaders and saying, look, you need to start a political fund in Scotland, or scrap your political fund supporting the Labour Party, one or the other, because the majority of your members vote SNP now. They don't vote Labour, you know, and I think, you know, that's something that should be pushed, you know. So I think there's things we can do. The problem in Scotland is the Tories rely on the media and government from Westminster for their support. The Labour Party's lost its base in Scotland. And I can't see in today's industrial world where you don't have the union power and these big employers, I don't see how Labour win that back. You know, so you need more popular. You need to look to Germany, where there's much fewer unions, but they encompass whole areas of industry rather than one particular factory or business. And I think that's maybe the way back for the trade union movement.
What I think you find, Ian, across Europe is there is a much bigger union density in their societies than we've got here. Without our public sector, you would hardly have anybody in a union. If the truth is,
that's the point I'm making, Tommy.
Yeah, definitely. But as far as Scotland is concerned, Roddy, I've made this point 100 times over, and people, I think, are beginning to realise that there is no recovery for the Labour Party without grasping the thistle of the constitutional question. If the Labour Party became a party that endorsed independence, then quite frankly, they could win back some people on left of centre policies of public ownership, higher standards of living, and more control of industry. These things are just as popular now as they've always been, but people don't now see beyond the constitutional question. If you want us to vote for you and you want to remain part of Britain, you're not getting our vote. And until Labour ditches the butcher's apron and grasps the St Andrews flag, they're never going to, in my opinion, recover in Scotland.
It's interesting that Wales example, because the First Minister of Wales acts very similar to the way Labour did act in the 80s and 90s in Scotland.
Definitely.
They were very much advocates for Scotland, and they did wrap themselves in the St Andrews flag and the Scottish Parliament. And the First Minister in Wales, Carwyn Jones, he's very strong for Wales. In fact, I think he's stronger for Wales than Nicola is for Scotland, actually, quite a few of the time.
Difficult.
Yeah, you know, so that's why they're getting, you know, so I see Wales is like 20 years or so behind, you know, where not behind, but in the evolution of their independence, because Labour is still advocating for Wales. And when Labour stopped advocating for Scotland and started advocating for the Union in 2014, they never recovered. That's them.
Can I just say, just before we're coming towards the end, I'll go to your thoughts as we wrap up the show, ladies and gentlemen. But for all you listening in, if you haven't already subscribed, could you hit the subscribe button? I meant to say that earlier. And then we'll know if you want us to carry on and do more shows like this as we go on. But could we, I'll go around this way. Ian, go back to you. Last thoughts on what happens next? What do we do next? What do we tell our listeners and viewers what they should be doing next?
Well, you know, I've been in politics for more years than I care to remember. And I've certainly had days similar to this when things have been looking a bit bleak, you know. But I've always been able to rise above it. And I always see, you know, hope at the end of the tunnel. And, you know, the only time I think you need to worry in politics is if you've allowed yourself to be spouting lies, you know, to be trying to con people. If you stay honest in politics and you keep battering away, sooner or later, folks say, you know, that guy's got a point. He's been saying that for a while. Maybe we should give him a wee bit more support. Now, I think the Alba message throughout this election has been an honest one. I've been proud to support it. I've got no doubt as the day goes on today, we'll see increasingly how true that message was. And I'll be ready tomorrow to carry on with Alba, to start building the party, because I see absolutely no hope for at least the next decade in the SNP. They have sold the jerseys. They are out the game. You know, they're in it for themselves. They're not in it for Scotland. That's my view.
Tommy?
I endorse just about everything that Ian has just said. I think the June conference that Alba is planning to hold becomes a very, very significant event. I hope that we have a democratic structure developed. I hope that we adopt policies that are very, very clear for the people of Scotland, that yes, we are for a Scottish currency and an independent Scotland. No, we're not for membership of a nuclear alliance, and we're maintaining the contradiction of wanting rid of nuclear weapons but being a member of NATO. I hope also, I would like to see us come out for a democratic republic. I think it's about time that a party that believes in independence stated clearly to the people of Scotland that there's no place for a monarchy. There's no place for inherited privilege in this new Scotland that we want to build. And if we develop the structures from the grassroots up, and we have a party that is full of integrity and honesty and people putting the country before their personal aspirations or their personal likes and dislikes, if we always look at the cause first, we could build a party that in years to come will be challenging the SNP on first past the post basis, not on the idea of just the list alone. And I think there's loads of really good SNP members, SNP voters who endorse a lot of what Alba stands for. It's just that they don't know it yet because we've not been able to get our message across there. So I would argue glass half full, don't lose faith. Let's try and build this vehicle and let's try and tie our ropes together.
Thank you, Tommy. And my dear friend Gareth, I'm glad to see you back for this winding up part. Your last thoughts on where we are now, what we can do for Scotland and the people out there. Should they lose hope? Should they be enthusiastic? Should they be hopeful? What do we do next?
In a word, I think we're screwed. I really do. I mean, what we're faced now with an SNP that's going to be more arrogant than ever. We're faced with Peter Murrell, who has the account books tucked down his underpants because it's a place no one will ever go.
Well, actually, I think he puts it somewhere safer than that then.
We have something to look forward to, and that is Leslie Evans being dragged into court and being told you're under oath and you better tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Beyond that, I've been listening to everybody, and including Tommy, and I just don't. I can hear the human spirit at work, but I can see the practicalities that are in front of us. And I'll have to wait to see what the Alba party want to do next, whether or not there is actually an opposition for the SNP, because, as you know, there is no opposition, and that's why I think that Nicola is so strident about the way she goes about things and the way she's able to block people off that she doesn't want to listen to. So, yeah, we're screwed for a while.
Thank you, Gareth. And Phil, what's your thoughts as we wrap up the show here today? Are you feeling more or less positive than you were?
There is one positive note in that what the people of Scotland voted for was independence, because most of us in Scotland believe that the SNP represent the legitimate entity that will carry us to independence. What we now await, I think, is the realisation on many that having missed what is that, 6 mandates so far, and that's the 7th one. What's going to happen here? Now, I listened very carefully to all the speakers, and Ian pointed out that his report on what Angus Robertson was stating, that maybe's aye, maybe's no, Kenny Dalglish, maybe sometime in the future we're going to do it in 5 years. And that's not the referendum, that's the legislation to enable a referendum. That's not good enough. That's not what most SNP supporters or independence-minded people, regardless of what party they support, want to hear. Section 10 has been rejected. That is the way to get it. Can we bring it around again through when the people of Scotland are ready? Well, I think the only answer is to work together, just as what Colette has been saying and Denise has been saying, to get people aware of their civic duty, how the system works, and to make sure that all the constituent parts of the opposition to this lazy, meandering route to independence, those of us that want a direct route, those that have been waiting for long and weary, something that was very emotive, what Gareth said earlier. The shoulders we stand on, those who have went before us, those who have died, those who won't see it, including Gareth himself. I mean, from my fingers crossed that's not the case, but you know, this is a very painful experience for those of us who care. The hollowness we felt in 2014. This is not, for me, it's nothing like it. This is just an understanding of the political machinations at work and how people are affected and corrupted by politics, how they have their own personal ambitions. They may get it for the right reasons, but very, very quickly they start to walk to the beat of the drum, and they forget why they were there in the first place. I have hope, but it is only in the growing awareness of the people of Scotland that to get what we want, we have to push SNP towards independence as quickly as possible through whatever route is necessary.
Thank you, Phil. And Colette, my friend, what have you got to say as closing comments? You're on mute, Colette.
Come on.
There you go.
Is that you?
Yeah, I've got you now.
Right, okay. I'm just hoping that, you know, what was promised comes around, but if it doesn't, my concern is that with the likes of Brexit has been covered up, the effects of Brexit has been kind of covered up with COVID, so nobody really knows right now what the impact of Brexit truly is on people, on the economy and people's lives, and that's what really kind of made me anxious yesterday about why people were turning to Tory. And I think, again, what we said earlier on, I think it was to do with, you know, the vaccination rollout, etc. They were focusing on that, not what is really maybe going on in the background. So yeah, I'm hoping that we get what we were promised. But I think, again, like everybody said, I think it's really up to ourselves, the grassroots, to keep putting the pressure on, and for the likes of ISP and, you know, Scotia Future and Alpha and all the rest of it, just to keep the pressure going and keep building for Scotland in the future. And I think it really is down to the grassroots now. I think it's not about personalities, it's about the actual people in society that have got life experience and want to make good for the generations to come.
Thank you, Colette. And Denise, my friend, what about you? What do you think for the next, for us all?
Well, I think, you know, like Alba's only been alive for 6 weeks. So, and it's got like a lot of members, and the members are activists. So that means they're actually going to be doers, so they can go and do things. So I think that's like a massive, you know, advantage. It's 5,000-6,000 people that are willing to work for independence. And I think they need to focus on the council elections coming up and get people there, and then the other side is the demos and pushing the SNP, but also with the awareness that Alba needs to have the ambition to replace the SNP as the party of independence if the SNP don't come through, and I don't think the SNP will come through. I think we need an alternative independence vehicle. I don't think the SNP will, but we'll give them a chance. And if they come through, that's a good purpose of ALBA as well. For the candidates, I have a lot of absolute admiration for the people that stood for ALBA and put themselves forward to a terrible media, a media that either smeared them or ignored them. And that's what you take in your hands when you stand up for Scottish independence in Scotland today. You are smeared, and not just by the unionists, by the SNP leadership as well, and by the journalists and by the establishment. That's what you're against. So anybody brave enough to stand gets like 100% of my appreciation and admiration, including Alex Salmond, who was brave enough to come back when he's seen the utter mess his protege, the person he trusted to hand the independence movement, which was a united movement on 45%, 7 years ago, he trusted this woman, and she has done nothing, absolutely nothing to advance the cause, and she has treated him I can't even bring words to explain how evil the treatment of Alex Salmond is. So, but good for him. He came back and he stood up for his cause and for our cause and the cause of Scotland, and he's not a coward. And that's what we need. We need brave people that are not cowards, like every one of those candidates. And I would say this poem, the poem is a saying by Cummins, and it reminds me of the candidates. And it says, rebels for a cause, poets with a dream, and they won't let the world die without a fight. And that's what ALBA has to be. We're not going to let the dream die without a fight.
Thanks very much. Well, the joy of this is I get the last word, which doesn't happen very often in this house. I can assure you, me getting the last word. But I'd like to firstly thank all of you, my friends and colleagues who have taken time out to come on here today and share your thoughts and hopes and dreams with us. And to you, viewers and listeners, I can't tell you how much I appreciate that you've been here. I know how I felt yesterday as the news began to filter through. And some of the comments I'm seeing here about how you're all saying, oh, well, I'm feeling better after this. Well, you want to know something? So am I, because you've all cheered me up and made me feel better that we're not fighting alone, and there's a hard core of us at least who intend to keep going, and I intend to keep going. I'm going to take a couple of days off, tan a couple of bottles of gin, as is my wont, Phil, as you know. I'm going to tan a couple of bottles of gin, and I'm going to dust myself down, and I'll be back to fight. And I'm too old in the skin and whatnot, or too thick in the skin to worry about the abuse we take. And we do take a lot. And I find it hard sometimes that a party that I've been associated with for 47 years of voting and over 50 years of membership, that these people can treat fellow independent supporters in such a disgusting manner. And then usually they turn around and try and be the victim. But going forward, ALPA is here. As Alex said to us, there's over 5,000 members, 20 councillors, 2 MPs, and we will go on and we will grow. And by the time, this time next year, when we have another one of these big shows, or we have some before then, we'll see what happens. I hope it will be more upmarket, or not, more upmarket, but more upbeat. And I hope you've enjoyed it. And I want you all to, as I say, and I love to say when I finish this show, I want you all to take care now. Goodbye, and thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.